extra members with us that were gone yesterday at meetings up in Casper, I understand. Hope those meetings went well. We welcome you to Revenue. Senator Wassenberger, Senator Ellis, Representative Paxton, who else? Representative Kinner, welcome. Anybody else I missed? Okay, today we've got 6 bills that we're going to be talking about. Making decisions on. My co-chairman said he's got a few announcements, so let's turn some time over to him and he can make those announcements, and then we begin our agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. The one announcement I want to make pertains to the people who are here today that weren't here yesterday. We did pass out of the committee, actually unanimously, bills number 93 and 134, those two. They did pass, and we held the vote open until today. If you want to vote on them, you can. It's up to you. All right. So if you weren't here yesterday and you want to vote, go over and tell somebody over at LSO that you want to vote, and you want to vote either yes or no. Okay. The other thing is, we have a brochure that's the very last thing on the agenda tomorrow. I think it's either the last thing or close to the last. And the LSO staff thought it would be a good idea to pass this out to you now, not to be reading while we're going through these other bills, but to have it so you can take it home tonight and review it to minimize the amount of time that we have to spend on it tomorrow. In other words, it's coming around to you now. It's a prototype, and he will be looking for suggestions to improve it. The only other thing I guess I can think of, Mr. Chairman, is that we have a very busy agenda. A lot of these items on the agenda are simply bills that we've seen before. Not all of them, but most of them have been. So we don't want to rehash too much of the same old thing over again unless there's specific amendments that want to be, or that the members want. So, and that's fine. I mean, we want to make sure they're in as good a shape as possible before we take them to the full session. So we're going to try to get on this, keep on this agenda. The first 2 items, I think I've allotted probably more time than what we need, and what we do is we'll move right away to the next item. And I think we've got a disclaimer on the front page that says that as soon as we're done with an item, we're going to move to the next one. And I guess that's all I have. But we got a big agenda. The last item is scheduled at 4:30, and that's when some of us get awful cranky. So we want to make sure we're not late on this. All right, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. And just by the way, he got us out of here yesterday about 4 o'clock, 4:10. No. Not bad.
I take no credit for that.
Any questions or comments from the committee regarding those announcements or our agenda? Okay. First then, bill for our discussion is the bill on monthly payment of ad valorem taxes. This is
Nope. You're a day ahead.
I kind of like that, Mr.
Hey, I'm zipping right along, aren't I?
Yeah.
Here we go.
You're just about.
I wondered why I had to dig for that bill. I thought this is out of order. Okay. First one is lodging tax, Department of Tourism. Who's going to explain that bill? Anybody want to? Josh, front and center. We'll talk about lodging tax, I guess, before we talk about ad valorem.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson from LSO. This is 19 LSO 130 lodging tax. This, if you remember from last year, we had the hospitality tax, but Management Council went with a different bill, and this is based primarily on that draft from Management Council last year. So you'll see on page 2. It imposes a statewide lodging tax of 5%, split into 3% and 2% for purposes of distribution. And then you'll see then bottom of page 2 and over to page 3 is where the distribution is. So the 3% under paragraph I goes to the Wyoming tourism account, and then funds there are expended with appropriation by the legislature for the tourism board and office of tourism. And then paragraph 2 is the 2% that goes out to the local government. And you'll see there's kind of 3 different ways that can go. So if a county, under subparagraph A, bottom of page 3, if a county has a local optional tax, a county-wide tax, it goes in the same manner as their current lodging tax goes. Over to page 4 on subparagraph B, this is if there's not a county-wide tax under subparagraph I, if also there's no city or town lodging tax, it goes to the County Board of Commissioners, and then it's expended in the same way as lodging taxes are expended currently under the optional lodging tax. Under subparagraph 2, if a city does, the portion that's attributable to that city goes to the city and is expended along with their lodging taxes, and then the remainder goes to the county. Over onto page 4 or 5, excuse me, you'll see then that the local optional tax is reduced because now they're getting a guaranteed 2% tax. So the 4% that is optional is reduced to 2%, so they could still have an additional optional up to 2%. The remainder of the bill then on page 6, what this is recognizing now that there's a guaranteed 2%. So we're repealing subparagraph D because that's dealing with 1% and nobody has 1%. Subparagraph E is now if you have only the 2% guaranteed by the statewide and you don't have an optional. Subparagraph F is if you have the 2% plus a 1% optional, and G is 2% plus a 2% optional. And this is the calculation to determine if you fall in the expenditure. If you make more than a certain amount of money, that it frees up the expenditure of those funds. And I think currently only Teton County is under that amount. And then over on to page 9, section 3 deals with currently if you have more than 2%, this says that 2% or the additional amount does stay on the books until the next general election. So for a limited time, some places could have additional 2%. So lodging tax. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Josh. Any questions from the committee? Hopefully that brings back some memories of the bill and wonderful memories, yes. Any questions from the committee for Josh? Okay, thank you. Take some public comment at this time. Let's have, first of all, go through any state agencies that would like to testify on this or provide testimony. Come on up. Be sure your microphone's on and you talk clearly into the microphone. We're being broadcast here, so we want everybody to be able to hear you. Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Diane Schober. I'm the Executive Director at the Wyoming Office of Tourism. And just wanted today to provide you some context around what a statewide marketing program really is. And if you would take this bill and move it forward favorably, how this would be managed through the same system that's currently in place to operate and deploy a statewide marketing program. So through the Office of Tourism, this state agency has been in existence for probably 60 years now. Our current budget today, annually, $12.5 million. On the biennium, $25 million. We have 24 full-time employees. Our budget today is the same that it was in fiscal year 9 and 10, and the number of employees that we have is the same as it was in 9 and 10. And so there hasn't been much growth in the agency in terms of overhead. The work that we do through our budget of that 12.5 million, about 75% of it, well, not about, it is exactly right at 75% of it, is actually in 900 series. The predominant component of that is through the advertising and paid media. That's the purpose of tourism marketing and tourism promotion, is to actually put the word out about Wyoming to people in strategic markets, strategic lifestyles, to get them to think about and then actually book a vacation to the state of Wyoming. And thus doing so, we're generating an economic contribution to the state of Wyoming by having non-residents come here, buy the goods and services from all of the tourism industry, supporting then jobs and a tax base for Wyoming residents. About 18% of our budget is dedicated to salaries and benefits, which is about in line with where we've been over the last 10 years. And then the other 7% of our budget goes into administrative overhead, freight, shipping, those types of expenses. And so I'm proud to be before you today to share with you those numbers. We were recently before the Management Audit Committee of the body of the legislature. Mr. Chairman was there and other members of this committee. And we shared with that particular legislative committee our balanced scorecard, our in-depth research, and the other things that we do to hold the agency accountable for the expenditure of funds, and also that return on investment that actually is yielding a growth in visitation and a growth in the economic impact of the state. Those are all records that we believe in constantly doing because we want to evaluate ourselves. We're not only accountable to you, but we're also accountable to an industry. An industry that is strong and mighty, is one of the leading contributors to the sales and use tax base of the state of Wyoming, an industry that is the largest private sector employer in the state of Wyoming. And so as they're looking to the Wyoming Office of Tourism, not only are we stewards of public funds and need to report that back to you, but the result of the work that we do also has to resonate with the industry that we represent. And so on that, I have some good news to share with you. Even just on our marketing campaign from this summer, which ended up, it finished up in October. We're in our winter campaign right now. But just some of the metrics on that. Website sessions, these are unique users, was up 30.3% over last year's work. Website users up 30.4%. Our partner referrals, these are when people come to the Wyoming website and then they leave and go to a Dude Ranch or the town of Cody or the Cheyenne Frontier Days or to a hotel or any service that they're looking for. This is when people actually leave our site and go through a connection to our site to one of our partners. Our partner referrals were up almost 20%, 19.7% over last year. And then actually fulfillment requests, people actually ordering our printed guide. We know there's such a high conversion. There's a 60% conversion on that. And what I mean is for every 10 people who order that printed piece, 6 of them actually book a trip and come to Wyoming. And so that was up 33% over last year. So the metrics on the campaign itself and the work that we want it to do, we want to create awareness for Wyoming, but then we want the consumer to take action to learn more about Wyoming. And then, of course, we want them actually to ultimately book and travel to Wyoming. And so the campaign is very promising for 2018. I can share with you what was yielded in overall travel from 2017. Obviously, we're not at the end of 2018, so we're not at that point. But overall, travel in its aggregate, and this is not just leisure travel. This is travel that people would be traveling for leisure, for meetings, for conventions, for business, for corporate, for group travel. But travel spending in 2017 generated $3.6 billion in direct expenditures, and that was up 8.9% over 2016. That spending then subsequently generated $188 million in local and state tax revenues, and that was up 9% over the year before. The leisure market represents about 33% of all motor fuels tax that's collected. It's a substantial amount. Visitor volume at 8.7 million was up 3.2% over the year before. And we, this industry, as I mentioned, about being the largest private sector employer, represents 32,120 jobs. You know, that's a town in Wyoming. That's actually a decent sized town in Wyoming in the number of private sector jobs, representing 923 million in earnings. And then, so that's travel in its aggregate. And when I was sharing with you earlier about the campaign that we deploy, you know, we're really focused on what is the incremental travel that marketing campaign is actually driving. So there would be people who would be already planning travel to Wyoming, but what we want to do is incrementally grow those who didn't know or weren't thinking about Wyoming and where that would be. And so we also actually engage in a lot of dedicated research to see what and how that's doing, how it works. We use this as insight and intel to alter, to shape, to review. You know, it's just good for us as we're looking at our campaigns. The campaign itself represents 1/3 of all travel. It's substantial. And our goal is to increase that even more, to represent even more travel. But the campaign in 2017 that was directly, this is the campaign, we spent about 4.3 million in paid media on that summer campaign. It generated 3.1 million visitors. And if you remember telling you, it was 8.7 million overall. So that's about 1/3 of all of those visitors, and representing 1.1 billion in direct spending. It's just, it's important to understand that we're looking at travel in its whole, because a lot of our partners are also spending money to generate travel in the state of Wyoming, but the state is also investing to create awareness about the state and generate that travel. As you take into consideration the legislation that's before you today, I just want to share with you where the competitive positioning is around Wyoming. So in this tourism marketing realm, and so we're charged with deploying a campaign that creates awareness and ultimately drives visitation. Wyoming ranks 31st in the nation behind all other states in tourism marketing promotion. We are behind our surrounding states of Montana. Well, I should start with Utah with a budget of about 27 million. Montana with a budget of right around 19 million. The state of Colorado with a budget of 23 million. Dakota, 18 million. Nebraska, North Dakota, Idaho are slightly less than Wyoming. But this is a competitive business. And with a national economy that's thriving, people are out and willing to travel, but they have a lot of options before them. And there are choices that they have to make every day when they're considering where they're going to go for their vacation. And we all want Wyoming to be at the top of their mind in that consideration set in the days of when they're considering it and ultimately book, because when people travel to Wyoming, it's good for all of us. With that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be certainly happy to answer those.
Just leave my microphone. Thanks, Diane. Any committee members have questions for the director? Appreciate the report. Any questions? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I was just wondering if it's you or if you have somebody else in your group who's going to explain the fact that this money that would be earmarked for tourism still has to be appropriated, and it kind of explained that you know, I think we want to make sure that the public understands that you can't buy Mercedes-Benz for the director and stuff like that without the Appropriations Committee okaying it.
Director,
help us with that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I'd be happy to address that. On page 3 of the bill, lines 1 through 6, as Josh referred to the distribution of the funds into the tourism account. As you can see on lines 3 and 4, it reads, "No funds shall be expended from the account until appropriated by the legislature, and funds into the account shall be used only for the operation of the tourism board, and the Office of Tourism." One thing I want to also mention, the tourism board is a 9-member industry representative board. That board is appointed by the governor of Wyoming and approved by the Senate. They have fiscal oversight over the agency as well. And so every month we present our financials to the board, and then they approve the budgets, the supplemental budget, the budget request, and review those on an annual basis. As we have visited with members of the legislature, members of this committee, we've asked about other agencies, boards, and commissions that have a dedicated fund, and it would be essentially what we're doing today with our standard budget. We would just go forward and say, here is what we plan to do and we are requesting spending authority. But in this legislation, the proposed legislation is that that would not be any expenditures until approved by the legislature.
Okay. Further questions from the committee? Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diane, how much money is expected with this 5% tax?
Diane.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Conley, I don't know the total of the total 5%. I can tell you what the 3% is that would be the dedicated to the Office of Tourism, because that other 2% would go out to the counties. But the 3% on fiscal year 18, just looking at what was collected off of that lodging sector that would be subjected to the 3%, would have generated $19.3 million.
Follow-up?
Go ahead.
And then the expectation from your office would be to get the 19.3 million and then therefore be able to kind of increase what you're doing?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Conley, we would put forth a plan for how we would grow the visitor economy. And, certainly, that's what we do every year when we come and we're asking for, through the general fund, for how we would grow the economy. And, when we're asking and seeking an additional appropriation, we're laying out a plan of this, knowing where we've been and the research and the intel that we know today, what we believe that can deliver in results. And we would be doing the same thing with any additional appropriation as we have always done.
Okay. Further questions from the committee? For the director, none? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Anybody else? Director Noble, you had your hand up. Come on up. Welcome back.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. They're going to pass out a handout that answers your question, Representative Conley, as it relates to what each of the components of this 5% would actually generate. And we were hesitant to use FY 2018 because of the eclipse, so we stuck with 2017. The eclipse, and we took on a new vendor, Airbnb, and there's a substantial amount of revenue that is pertaining to other periods but was not collected until 2018. So we used 2017's numbers. There obviously will be some growth in what you see there, but it is the numbers that we had. The entire 5% will generate $32,467,000. The 2% that would go to the locals generates $12,987,000, and the 3% is $19,480,000 from FY 2018. We got a question of the group as to what its intent is as it relates to this bill. My understanding of the bill is that the existing lodging taxes that are in place in the counties would remain until they were voted on again, at which point they would be limited to 2% as a maximum that the locals could deal with. Currently, there are 12 jurisdictions in the state that have a 4% lodging tax today. You add the additional 2% that is being allowed under the statewide lodging tax, and you're now at a 6% lodging tax plus a 3% statewide lodging tax. And then in addition to that, your sales tax. If you take Laramie County as an example, we have a 6% sales tax, and you add to that another 9%. We were at 15% as it relates to the tax that would be generated here. I just want you to be aware of the fact that until it's voted on again, you'll have a rate that is in excess of the 4% that was contemplated originally for local options. And I just wanted to make that clear. The other issue is, I don't know exactly how much it will be, but there will be some level of administrative impact on this as it relates to coding the sales tax system to make this change in the distribution. Don't think it's terribly invasive in the system, but it is something that would have to be reviewed. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions from the committee for the director? Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Noble, again, I didn't follow how you got to 15%. That seems excessive to me. I can understand that there'd be an additional 2% for a couple of years, right, until there was the vote again,
Correct.
but not going up to 15%.
Okay.
Director.
The entire statewide lodging tax is 5%. You add to that the 4% that's already in place in the county, that's at 9. You add the 6% sales tax in Laramie County, and you're at 15%.
But that's temporary.
And that's temporary until the next time that lodging tax on a local level comes up for a vote. Yeah, and then the max would be at 13% at that point. If you had a 6% sales tax and you added to it the lodging taxes that are imposed, it would be 13% then.
Okay.
All right, and Mr. Chair,
Follow
this
up?
is Bob.
Go
So
ahead.
then the reality is, though, that's only a 2% increase.
It's a 2% increase as it relates to the locals. It's a 5% increase, obviously, across the board as it
Got it.
relates to lodging.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Further questions from the committee for the director? None? Okay. Thank you, Director. Anybody else from any of the agencies? We'll open up to the public. Come on up, Mr. Brown. Be sure to introduce yourself.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Chris Brown, representing the Wyoming Lodging and Restaurant Association and the Wyoming Travel Industry Coalition. I will get to addressing Director Noble's question of our intent with the bill here shortly. But Mr. Chairman, with your permission, if I could have 2 minutes of the history of how we got to here, I think it sets up the discussion pretty well. So 2 years ago, the hospitality and tourism industry got together when Wyoming was going into a bust cycle to discuss alternate funding ways to place the Office of Tourism off of the general fund and off of the vulnerability associated with being primarily an energy economy. We started working with the initiative that you all recall, the 1% leisure and hospitality tax. That enjoyed some favor last year up until just before the session where it failed. At that time, you recall that Management Council brought forward the statewide lodging tax, which leadership viewed as the preferred method moving forward. But because that bill was brought so late before the session, there wasn't enough time for the industry to try to find compromise with that bill. We reached out to the industry. We did get quite a bit of feedback, and it was varied. And the feedback that we got from the industry primarily focused on three concerns with lodging tax. Number one concern with the industry is that the Office of Tourism and the statewide marketing program would be placed on a significantly more competitive funding set with our surrounding states. Director Noble illustrated how our surrounding states are funded, and tourism is a very competitive business attracting folks to the state. The number two concern was making sure that the funds were dedicated to funding tourism and not that they just go to the general fund to have tourism come back and have to ask for that through the general fund. We certainly have never had the intent to reduce legislative oversight, and we support the idea that tourism will still have to come back in front of appropriations with their budget as described previously. The third concern was a bit of a safety net for the local option lodging taxes. You've heard me all testify before on the importance of the local option lodging tax and how critical that is at driving traffic locally, where the state Office of Tourism is charged with selling Wyoming and promoting Wyoming domestically and internationally. When those folks come to Wyoming, it's then that local option lodging tax that says, you're here, this is why our county or our city is a great place for you to stay a night or two. So those were the three primary tenets of concern that we heard in the couple of weeks leading up to the session. Of course, everybody knows that the 1% leisure and hospitality tax failed. And at that time, I mentioned there wasn't enough time. And so when I lobbied you all against the statewide lodging tax this past session, I think you all heard my commitment that we didn't have enough time to talk about it. We understood the direction that the legislature wished to proceed in. And given enough time, we were committed to working with the industry to see if there would be a compromise for us to work around the statewide lodging tax. So after the 2018 session ended, the Wyoming Lodging and Restaurant Association, the Wyoming Travel Industry Coalition, and the Wyoming Tourism Board held a second retreat up in Casper, a 2-day retreat, to reassess our direction and take a look at what our options were. And without question, the industry unanimously felt like proceeding with the 1% leisure and hospitality tax again was the best pathway forward for all the reasons that we explained to you this past session. Understanding that the political climate doesn't allow for a pathway forward with that right now, they felt like the second best choice was the 3-2-2 option presented in front of you. And that it's explaining that I will address Director Noble's question about what our intent is. As Director Noble mentioned, the 3% statewide lodging tax, which would really be the only actual intended new tax or tax increase in this discussion, 3%, would generate a little bit north of $19 million, and it was already explained on how that would put us on a more competitive footing set. The 2% back to the local option lodging tax, our intent is for that to replace 2% of the existing local option lodging tax. So whereas either counties or municipalities currently have the option to vote on a 2%, 3%, or 4% local option lodging tax, that 2% going back is the safety net I spoke of a few minutes ago, so that when the local option lodging taxes come back up for re-election, there's at least 2% of that guaranteed. And then the 2% remaining would be what they are allowed to vote on at election time. So our intent, even though this is billed as a 5% statewide lodging tax, that is our intent, is for it to be a net of a new 3% lodging tax and then 2 replacing 2 existing. So I think that it's a wordsmithing issue that we could work with LSO on to address that. Our intent, and we would not support a 15% total tax burden on lodging. 13% is the national average on lodging. And 13% is where this bill, if presented the way we intend, would bring the maximum tax on a room in Wyoming to. We held 3 statewide webinars throughout the course of the interim, and Chairman Madden attended one of those because we wanted to make sure to give the industry across the state an opportunity to understand this proposal and to also give us feedback. Through those webinars, throughout our own meetings, and throughout board outreach, we've spoken to approximately 100 properties across the state, from owners, vice presidents, directors of sales and revenues, and general managers. And for the most part, the industry does support this initiative moving forward. So generally speaking, we've found support, but the key tenets that I mentioned earlier, dedicated to funding tourism, competitive funding level, and safety net for the local option lodging taxes are the key 3 pieces in the bill that allow for industry support with it. To be transparent, this proposal has not been universally accepted across the industry. You're likely to hear from some lodging properties that dislike this as well, but we've found support from the majority that we have spoken to. And so in closing, Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully submit that this bill represents genuine compromise. For as long as I know, the industry has opposed a statewide lodging tax for the reasons I've lobbied you on for the past 7 years. We've worked hard to find true compromise because it's that important to the industry for the visitor economy to be given its best chance to grow across the state. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we do have other members from the industry that would like to speak, but I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris from the committee? One, Representative Dayton.
Thank you. Chris, I have a question. It's possible, I think, that we could generate more money than what is needed, what you're saying that the 3% would go and 2%, Is it possible, if that would happen, that we could incorporate in this bill a way to tip that money back to the general fund?
Chris?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you for the question. Yes, I do think that there is a possibility of discussion of where that ceiling would be. I think initially, if we were talking maybe to put a ceiling at $18.5 million and anything above that would revert to the general fund, I think that we would certainly be willing to find a compromise in that area and certainly willing to have that discussion.
Okay. Any further questions from the committee? None.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Other tourism folks that would like to speak on this bill, proposed bill. Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Jim Waldrop. I'm the president of Silver Dollar Inc., which is the management entity for the Wirt Hotel, the Wirt Plaza retail shops, and the $1 Million Cowboy Bar in Jackson. I'm here today to speak upon long-term investment, proven investment in our tourism economy. As Chris explained, you as legislators have spoken to our industry, and we're here to show you that we have responded. It's hard for me to speak today in support of a new tax. I'm not supporting new tax. I'm here as a firm and solid supporter of tourism and its proven ROI that it provides to our visitor economy. Our neighboring states surpass our investments, as you've already heard today. And let's choose to invest now in our industry. We can and have delivered over the course of the past many years. Our strategic approach, our top-tier delivery, our commitment to the values of Wyoming are at the forefront of our tourism mission. We feel like the time is now to show our support for this industry. Without your support, our neighboring competition, we will struggle without your support. I simply ask for competitive funding impacting our state and many local businesses, including my own. Thank you for your time today and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for being here today, and any questions from the committee.
Thank you.
Appreciate it again for being here. Anybody else would like to speak on this bill? Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Michael Keller. I am the General Manager for Xanterra Parks and Resorts in Yellowstone National Park. I oversee about 2,300 rooms in Yellowstone, employing about 3,000 employees to support the Yellowstone operation. And I would also like to echo the thoughts of members of the tourism industry about the support and belief for this bill and the fact that the state of Wyoming needs to be competitive in advertising what we are and what we are for visitor services and experiences across the great state of Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Keller from the committee? One.
Mr. Chairman, it's not directly on point, but I believe there's an ongoing dispute between Park County and your company about the collection of taxes within the boundaries of the park. Can you update us on where that is and where that's happening? I mean, since you're here, I'm glad you're here.
Okay. There was a dispute about collection of taxes towards, I think, vehicle registration, maybe what you're speaking of, sir. Our company historically had been based in Gardner, Montana, and our vehicle registration for that time had been done in the state of Montana. However, recognizing many vehicles of ours were actually serviced and based in Wyoming, we worked with Director Bill Panos in the state of Wyoming, and we actually reallocated a lot of our vehicle fleet to Wyoming and now have them registered out of Park County. So the state of Wyoming is now collecting the taxes necessary on those vehicles that are used to support our operation for Yellowstone National Park.
That's good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Keller? None. Thank you for being here again.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Anybody else who would like to speak on this bill? Come on up. Good to see you again, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mike Mosier, Wyoming State Liquor Association. This kind of frightens me to do this because I run the risk of looking like I'm getting warm and fuzzy in my elder years, but I'll have to say we're okay with a bill 2 days in a row. This is I know. It's time to retire. Originally, we had some trepidation. The board had some trepidations with the hospitality tax concept. But in this case, with the lodging tax, we certainly support tourism's efforts. We're in the hospitality industry as well. In my case, being kind of a tax kind of guy, I see this more like the fuel tax that we increased, where there's a fairly direct correlation between the tax and where it goes to. I realize that there are going to be some people that'll say, well, if you're traveling in Wyoming, but the bottom line is the majority of travel is tourism and it feeds off itself in a good way. And so it actually makes sense. It's possible, for example, that you may not be traveling when you stay in a motel room, but that's probably because you made your wife really mad. So you've got your own problems to worry about. You probably don't need to worry about taxes. So we're fine with this concept. I salute Chris and, well, we have mutual members sitting up front here, these fine establishments, because this wasn't an easy place to get. But I think we have general consensus in the industry that if you want to pull tourism off the general fund, this is a laudable concept. And I will be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Yesterday, as he supported the other bill, I went up to him and I expressed my thoughts. I said, if my co-chairman and I just had 4 more years working with you, Mr. Mosier, we'd probably have a pretty nice fellow. But we appreciate your testimony and your thoughts on this particular bill. Committee, any questions for Mr. Mosier? Representative Connolly.
Chairman, maybe we could, because we do want the Mike Mosier Employment Act. We could perhaps put in something to tax liquor. We could. I'm looking at.
Give him something to do. Any questions for Mr. Mosier? Okay. Thank you, Mike. Anybody else would like to speak on this bill? Come on up. We've got you and then the county commissioner. You can come on up and join. You can sit at the table. Since you're up, we'll take you first, though, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Tony O'Brien. I'm the general manager at Little America Hotel and Resort here in Cheyenne. New tax is not an easy pill to swallow, as Jim mentioned, and I think that we've come to a good compromise of something that's fairly tolerable. I've lived in Wyoming now for about 3.5 years, and we have some of the best amenities in the country, and we truly have a great product to offer people from all over the world. And we see those people come, and I can't tell you how many guests that I speak to daily that are amazed at how beautiful Wyoming is and how much they enjoy their time here. But I think that what this bill addresses is allowing us to be competitive with those states that are right next to us, that are competing for the same tourists and for the same business travelers and the same conventions on a daily basis. This allows us to be more competitive with them, and in the long run will help grow the tourism economy here in Wyoming. I appreciate everybody's hard work in this and stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. O'Brien? Appreciate you being here and testifying on the bill. All right, next up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bill Novotny with the Wyoming County Commissioners Association on our Revenue Committee. And at this point, the commissioners are neutral on this bill. However, we do want to share our concerns that were raised by Mr. Noble, and the fact that in a county like myself, which just approved a 2% lodging tax, the possibility that you would push us to 4% for the next 4 years. So we would hope that a conforming amendment or a correction could be made to put the counties that are just completed the passage of their lodging tax. You would not put them in jeopardy of increasing their lodging tax until the next vote. Now, I'd like to also speak directly to a point that Representative Dayton raised, and that would be capping the amount of money that could be transferred to the Department of Tourism and redirecting the excess funds to local government to deal with the impacts of major tourism activities. Teton County is a prime example. They see millions of visitors a year and struggle to deal with the impacts that are associated with that. In Johnson County in 2017, in this example, within a 5-week period, we had Longmire Days, the North American Basque Organization, and also the Eclipse. The impacts that my public works department and law enforcement experienced over that, which generated considerable tax revenue for the state as well as lodging tax money, cannot be offset because we don't have the option within the current structure of the lodging tax to capture more funds to deal with the impacts like you see in Teton County, and I believe Park County is the other one that actually hits up against the cap where they can use that. So we would ask, again, that you consider the impact on local government and try to find a way to free up any excess money over the cap and redirect that to local government. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. And any questions for Bill from the committee? I think your point's well taken and on that portion of the bill, and I would suspect an amendment coming on that to try to better clarify that issue. Anybody else would like to testify on this bill? Welcome. Make sure your microphone's on. Is it the green light or red light?
It's very sensitive, just.
Are we good?
There we go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Christine Hill with Timberline Hospitalities. Timberline owns and operates approximately 800 guest rooms across the state of Wyoming. I've had the opportunity of serving as their Director of Revenue, Sales, and Marketing for the last 17 years and have valued the information and the opportunity to learn about the tourism impact on the local economy in the state of Wyoming. We operate Hiltons, Super 8s, Comfort Inns, Holiday Inn Expresses, Candlewoods, and the impact of tourism on our business is something that we rely on greatly. We rely on the local option lodging tax. We rely on the partnerships and the co-op opportunities with the Office of Tourism. And we definitely look at our expenditures in relation to what the Office of Tourism is doing. And we need those co-op opportunities to be successful in our industry. So as others have spoken, we are not a proponent of new taxes, but we definitely think that the Wyoming Office of Tourism needs an opportunity to be on the same playing field. The proven ROI of the Office of Tourism and the campaigns that they have deployed have been, it's the proof is in the pudding, I guess you could say. So we do support and look forward to the opportunity to grow the tourism economy for the state of Wyoming.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hill. Any questions for Ms. Hill from the committee? None? Well, while you're sitting at that desk, just a question, and I guess this goes to any of the concessionaires or the service providers. As this tax is being talked about is increasing, have you run the numbers and the concerns about passing this on to the customer and having a negative effect? The extra 2%, will it be noticed at all? I'm sure your industry has talked about that. And
yes, members of the committee, certainly it is a concern. And the 1% obviously was much more palatable to obvious reasons. But the impact of putting us on the same playing field and the opportunities of increased revenues from that perspective, I believe outweigh the 3%.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Again, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Anybody else that'd like to speak on this bill? Come on up, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Dan Noble again. Mr. Temte actually reminded me that the last time this bill came before the committee, one of the things that we felt, in addition to having funding to make the changes necessary to the system, but we would also need time as well. And we'd asked for a delayed implementation date at that point. We would like to do the same with this, and certainly something that could be handled now or later, either way, but it is something that I want you to be aware of. Not only do we need funding to make the changes to the system, but we'll also need the time to make that happen as well.
So, Director, on the bill, it's July 1st, 2019. What's your recommendation?
Probably, my thought would be to delay it till the first of the following year. That gives us a year to get it in place. It gives us 9 months to get it in place, actually.
Okay. Any questions for the Director? We got one. Representative Kenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Noble. And I should have asked this earlier, but could you remind me, I believe earlier you mentioned that there were 12 counties that had the 4% currently?
That's correct.
Could you remind me of how many counties? I think we heard from Commissioner from Johnson County that they have a 2%. Could you just go through that whole thing and then include how many counties do not currently have a lodging tax?
Thank you.
Always great to have great support.
Exactly. Right. I can just, I'll run down the list and talk about what jurisdictions have what. Albany County, 4% lodging tax. Bighorn has 2 jurisdictions within it that have a lodging tax. Lovell and Grable, 2% in Lovell, 3% in Grable. Campbell County, 2%. Carbon County, 2%. Converse, 3. Crook, 2. Fremont, 4. Goshen, 4. Hot Springs, 4. Johnson, 2. Laramie, 4. Within Lincoln County, Afton, Cokeville, and Diamondville, all 2%. Kemmer, 4%. Natrona County, 4. Niobrara, 3. Park County, 4. Platte County, 3. Sheridan, the town of Sheridan only within Sheridan County, 4%. Town of Pinedale within Sublette County, only Pinedale has the tax, 4%. Sweetwater, 3%. Teton, 2. Uintah County, Evanston only, 3%. Washakie County, 4%, and Weston County, 4%.
Representative, follow up?
So thank you. I couldn't keep track of the counties, but are there some counties that do not have the tax at all, and then it may exist within a municipality?
Yes, let me see here. Bighorn County does not have the tax, but the Lovell and Grable do. Lincoln County does not have the tax, but Afton, Cokeville, Diamondville, and Kemmer do. Not yet. I'm sorry. You're right. Niobrara does not have the tax, but Lusk does. Sheridan County does not have it, but the town of Sheridan does, or city of Sheridan does.
It passed during this, the 4% countywide
sorry.
just passed. I'm very familiar with that.
That won't be available until January on this sheet. Sublette does not have it, but the town of Pinedale does. Uintah, Evanston has the tax, but Uintah County does not. And that's the list.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director.
Further questions for the director? Mr. Sweeney. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The director mentioned 5%, taking like Laramie County up to the 15.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be easier to describe in like Laramie County, Natrona counties, not totally similar, but that we're actually just adding the 3% until we're transitioning 4 years. I think Laramie County just passed theirs, Natrona County just passed theirs. So we've got 4 years of transitioning utilizing 4%, which is actually in Laramie County's example, 13% total, not 15%.
Director?
Actually, until the tax is voted on again, which would be in Laramie County's case, 4% of their 4% tax, in the next election, they will be limited to be able to voting on a 2%. Until that point in time, they will have the 4% in place that they currently offer. Okay, there will be an additional 2% local added to that. So the local option will now be 6% until it's voted on again, and a 3% statewide lodging tax, which brings the total, when you add the sales tax to it, to 15%.
Can I have a follow-up on that?
Sure, go ahead.
So what you're describing there is a windfall to the lodging tax, the board, of an additional 2%, 4 plus 2, in that case for the next 4 years. Is that what you mean?
Well, it is, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Representative Sweeney, that is the way, in my understanding of the way the bill actually works today, is that 2% that is dedicated from the statewide lodging tax to local governments would be added in addition to whatever is imposed in the county today. Since Laramie County currently has a 4% lodging tax, the 2% added to it would bring their total to 6%. Then you add the 3% statewide lodging tax to that, and you're at 9% lodging tax. Then you add the sales tax, which brings them to 15%.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. I do not believe was the intent. But I would defer to the director that I'm sure he's correct. That's what the bill says. But those are some things I believe we've got to get worked out.
Yeah. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Following along with the last comment, is there a way that we could cap this at 17%? And as a result of that, the quote hit, so to speak, would come from, during the transition, would come to the state fund, the state tourism fund, until this election's been held. In other words, here's what I'm saying, there's a lot of angst about 15% rather than 13, but we could cap it in no case can it exceed 13%, in which case, I guess what would happen, that these local governments or local communities would have 6% for the next 4 years, but the state would only have 1 more percentage point of the 3, 1% of the 3 that was intended until this is worked out. Is that, maybe you can think about how we can fix this, because I don't think we can say you guys voted for a 4% tax a month ago and now we're going to say you can't have it after all. That's not right. But we could, just as a matter of compromising and get this moving, just say that for what county, what county has, Albany County, right? They have 4%. We say, well, Albany County for the next 6 years will get what they voted on last month plus the 2%. But because they can't charge more than 15%, that means only 1% will flow into the state tourism fund. And I don't know how much that would be a hit that would be, but I'm just trying to come up with a way we can move forward on this.
Director, your thoughts?
Somehow, Mr. Chairman, somehow I think we have to recognize I guess I'd call it a synergy between the taxes that are already in place and what would be added as part of the statewide guarantee, the 2% that's being added as a statewide guarantee. And I guess it would be an exercise of, as you do this, as you walk through this exercise, you say, if there is already a 2% lodging tax in place in a jurisdiction, it is replaced by the statewide guarantee. Same tax, statewide guarantee, and then we write the system to make sure that we're not charging in excess of that. And obviously, we would have to state to the local governments that we send, or to the lodging industry that we send this to, what their actual rate would be. The wordsmithing of that, I think, is going to be not what I'd say trivial. It'd be very difficult to do this, but really what you're saying is we're going to replace the 2% tax that is in place in a given jurisdiction with a guarantee, but not add anything more than what is already there. So that, and I just don't know how you write this to make that happen. The other possibility is if there is a tax already in place that is 2% or in excess of 2%, that 2% goes to the state general fund along with the 3% statewide until such time as the tax comes off, and then the 2% guarantee takes over. I'm sure Josh is his head's spinning trying to figure out how to make this work too. But
we're hoping he is.
Yeah. But I mean, that is the art of this, is we're going to have to find a way to to look to what is already in place and either replace that with the statewide guarantee, stating that that piece of it will never come off, and that once the 4% lodging tax or 3% lodging tax in a specific jurisdiction comes off, you're only limited then to the additional 2%. And I just don't know, and I'm certainly willing to listen to anybody that has an idea on this, how to make that happen. But I think the art of this is going to be, say, how do you make the distinction that if there's already a tax in place, this replaces it as a guarantee, and anything over and above that has to be voted on. But really, you're stating that we're not adding any new tax to your bottom line unless you don't have one already today. Mm-hmm. At that point, you do get a 2% tax as of the effective date of this bill.
Well, if that works, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sweeney.
So what the committee's going to vote on today is not the final, obviously not the final product. So you're voting on conceptually the whole thing. But there's a lot of wordsmithing, and I don't think you've got time for that debate today.
Yeah, and this is our last meeting, and as the co-chairman reminds me, and would like to get it as good as possible before it leaves this committee. And I'm sure that if we put our heads together with the help of LSO, that we can come up with the wordsmithing that as it leaves this committee, it's in better shape than it is now before we present to the full legislature as a bill, if it progresses that far. So that's our hope, is that we can correct this. I think we all have a good idea of what we'd like to see with this bill and this wordsmithing that we need to have done, but how we get there. So committee, put your thinking caps on. Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we hear from Josh, see if he has any thoughts at this point?
Do we dare?
I think so.
Josh, I hear some whispering back there at your desk.
So
any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, as an alternative to what Director Noble was just saying, another option may be to delay the 2% statewide guarantee until the next election, if you have 2% or more already. And that might be a simpler way to handle it. I don't know. That was one of the thoughts I had.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Sweeney.
I like that because it's less confusing. And Commissioner Novotny made a good point. They just passed, it sounds like a 2% county, if I understood him correctly. So it doesn't all of a sudden pop them up to 4% right off the bat, which will be difficult on them to try to explain. And I like the idea of delayed implementation. You move directly forward with the 3%. Mm-hmm. The way I'm understanding that is, and I think it would be less harmful and less confusing.
And it's a good suggestion. The only drawback is that we delay it, and we're talking about, if I heard it right, what, 2 counties, Sheridan, and they just recently passed the additional tax. Albany and 4.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, there would be a few counties that would be impacted immediately by it because they don't have a county-wide lodging tax. Right. How much that would really mean in the county itself, I'm not sure I can answer that really. But you also have to recognize that, like in Lincoln County, Lincoln County does not have the tax. However, the municipalities within it do. Trying to figure out how you would delay implementation on some, but not all. There isn't a county in the state that doesn't have some tax either at the county level or at a municipal level. So I guess the thought would be in some way imposing the tax on the county immediately or whenever it becomes effective in those areas where it's imposed on the municipalities. But I think you still have to, in an instance like that, you've got to recognize that some of those jurisdictions may have in excess of 2%, and you either absorb it based on the current rate and just basically say, when it comes off, it will be 2% remains as a guarantee, and anything else is what the voters vote on. And that really, the bill does that today. Yeah. It just does not account for utilizing the guarantee in lieu of what was voted on by the public for that first 2%. And that's really kind of the art of this. Either delay implementation entirely on the 2% until the next general election, and that, at which point 2% is automatically imposed across the state, or you somehow say if you have a 2% lodging tax or in excess of that, the first 2% now becomes a statewide guarantee and just remains on. So we don't change the tax rate at all. You're just basically in lieu of what would with the first 2 pennies. Anything over that doesn't change at all.
Okay.
Just a possibility.
I'd like to hear from both the Department of Tourism and also Chris, your association, your response to this suggestion of the delay, your ideas and thoughts on that. And Diana, if you want to provide some comments too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Brown, Wyoming Lodging and Restaurant Association, Wyoming Travel Industry Coalition. Our intent all along has been for that to be the case. If it ended up that the bill did create 2% on top of the up to 4% for the local option, we would not support that. And so our intent all along has been for the 2% portion of this to be a safety net guaranteed back to the local option lodging taxes, and then for there to be an additional optional 2% for them to remain up to 4 whole as the local options determine as appropriate. I think delaying the implementation, as Director Noble mentioned, probably seems like the most simple way to approach that. I'm not an expert at wordsmithing that, so I would lean on Josh and Director Noble and Director Schobert for us all to continue to work through that. But I think that will need to be addressed as it moves forward. And I think that delaying that 2% component of it till the next general election is probably a more simple and appropriate approach, because we don't want and never intended for the local option to exceed 4%.
Diane?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I concur with what Mr. Brown said. And as we've been going through this bill, you can see that mine is cross-tabbed and written up, and certainly admire the work that LSO does. But perhaps even as you look at that in Section 3, there's probably an opportunity there where it talks about when you move to the next general election or whatever that time frame may be, that's where it could be addressed. That's our initial thoughts without having an opportunity to go into more in-depth. But we believe that hopefully that this could be addressed in a way that doesn't create too much complication for the intent of where we want to go.
Okay. Further discussion or questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Sweeney.
So next general election, tying it to the next election also is a bit complicated because these go in 4-year cycles. Yeah. So implementation, delayed implementation until such time as that 4 years would be up, instead of tying it to the next general election, might be a better thought. That would be appropriate. The other issue on the counties that currently, if the language could somehow get tied back to, if you've already implemented a lodging tax and you have a lodging tax successfully in place, whether it's a city or county jurisdiction, and it's a county, it sounds to me that it's counties in issue. Couldn't there be a way to wordsmith that they automatically, if you haven't passed one as a at the county level, some sort of immediate implementation of the 2%. I don't know how to say that, obviously.
Yeah. Anything's possible. Okay. Any questions for these two before we dismiss them? All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else that'd like to provide testimony? Come on up. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jim Osterfoss. I own and manage the Negawarn Mansion Bed and Breakfast here in Cheyenne. I fully support the bill, and we're correct on making a few changes on it. I also operate or represent Wyoming Homestay and Outdoor Recreation, which is basically the bed and breakfast and ranch recreation group here in the state. I also run an association of historic hotels called Historic Hotels of the Rockies, with a number of historic properties here in Wyoming. And both of those also support the bill.
Great.
Having about a little over 50 years of hotel ownership management, tourism management, the point where sales taxes start to affect our business is when they get really obscene. The 15 I wouldn't worry about. It would concern me, but I wouldn't worry about it. The 13 is right on average with the rest of the world. So anyway, thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you for being here. And any questions? None. Thank you again for being here and providing testimony. Anybody else? If not, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your wishes on this particular bill on lodging tax? Any comments, discussion, questions? Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the testimony, I would like to have LSO wordsmith an amendment to put a $19 million cap index to inflation.
That's an amendment.
And, well, maybe it's just a thought rather than an amendment if that's not appropriate at this time. With the access to local governments for tourism-related infrastructure, just throwing that out there. If it's not time for an amendment, I'll hold.
Yeah, the bill will have to move first before we start talking about amendments. But
yeah, thank you.
We've I think beat to death our concerns about this particular issue on this bill, on the implementation of it and how it coincides with other counties that have already passed an additional tax. Any discussion? Any further discussion on the bill? Entertain a motion to move.
I'll move.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I just wanted to say, I guess, add a little bit of historical perspective to this and how this came about. I was probably part of it because I was watching over the last 12 years that when the rest of the economy was doing good, then the tourism budget went up, okay? And that's because primarily the mineral industry made that possible. Then when the mineral industry goes down, then they end up getting their budget cut. And when you stop and think about that, the way we've been doing it out of the general fund in that manner almost accentuates the fiscal cycle that we live in. And that's why it is so important that this have its separate funding that is not cyclical and not causing their ability to attract tourists to go down when the mineral industry goes down. And that's kind of where I came from 3 years ago when we started on this. So I hope that we can come up with, if there's a way of an amendment that can be fixed better when we're in the general session, when you're in the general session. If that is a problem, that delay thing sounds good. And if we can get an amendment today that will get us through that, I'd be all for it and would support it. So I would move the bill, and then I guess we'll see what happens on amendments.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded by Representative Connolly. Motion was made by my co-chairman, Representative Madden and seconded by Representative Conley to move the bill forward. Any further discussion on that? Center case.
Mr. Chairman, I do have part interest in a hotel property. They pay part of my wages. I'd like to declare a conflict on this bill.
So noted. Further discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of this motion on this bill, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Oh, it's a roll call. Thank you. Yeah, this is a bill. Thank you.
Wait a minute, Mr. Chairman. Wait about a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know, it feels like I've got one foot out the door here. I'm just trying to move things along, folks. Help me out. Okay, proposed amendments, especially this one that we're talking about on the implementation. Any proposed amendments? Representative Obermuller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I guess it's the proper time. I would like to have LSO wordsmith an amendment for us to set a $19 million cap indexed to inflation with the excess going to local governments for tourism-related infrastructure.
Motion's been made and seconded by Representative Paxton. Discussion on this motion. Representative Conley, we'll take you first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Obermuller, I understand given our conversation, I'm concerned, well, about two things. One is the cap seems high enough to me, that's for sure, given that that's what the expectation of the funding is. But I am a little concerned about a cap to start with, that instead this purpose of this bill in part is to get tourism off of the general fund. I mean, that really is the purpose, and to allow them to be able to grow their industry. So a cap on its own concerns me. But my bigger issue is about the directing of it to kind of municipalities. I think this bill should do one thing. This bill's purpose is not to kind of supplement local government funding. I think we have an obligation to take care of local government funding in a completely different way. And if there was going to be a tip based on a cap, it should just go to the general fund, because that additional money is just a penny, honestly, towards what we need to do with local governments. And even the language that was used by Mr. Novotny was that they needed money for all sorts of things that I don't consider tourism, but that's exactly what they needed, whether it be kind of more infrastructure, more kind of services that would be basic kind of county services. It's not for advertising for tourism. It's for county services that were needed because of having increased tourism. So I don't like the idea of the tip going to kind of locals. If any tip, it should go to the general fund, is my thought. And I'm wondering if that could be a friendly amendment.
Representative Obermuller.
I don't think so. I think that if the first part of it works and the tourism board gets $19 million indexed to inflation, if that works really well, that means our tourism impact goes up, and we need to deal with that tourism impact. And so that's why I see the two pieces that fit together. If the one works, then the other needs to work, and that is the infrastructure component of keeping up with the tourism industry. When you go over to the western part of the state and visit Jackson, you see those kinds of needs in that area. They have tremendous infrastructure impacts of the number of people they have to move through their area. So I'd like to see that money go that way.
Okay. Motion was made. Second, we're still discussing this. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, to make sure I understand this, Mr. Co-Chair, is your motion in the implication of your motion that the unappropriated balance in the account, once it gets beyond $19 million, it would spill? Is that? Then I can support it. But it sounds to me like you're saying that if the money comes in and is $20 million that over a year, and we've set the budget at 19 million, so we're going to give the other million to somebody else. And I think that normally when you talk about these tips, you're tipping it out of an account that you don't want to get out of control on the size of it. That was my question.
Representative Obermuller.
Right now, Mr. Chairman, and it is very much that over the 19 million indexed for inflation, that money would go to the local governments to deal with their impacts of this.
All right, I'll second it for discussion.
Motion been made and seconded, for the discussion on this, I would just add, I agree in principle with it, but anytime and this would be considered probably earmarking, and we all know how legislators feel about that, especially the old timers that went through that de-earmarking phase of their life of serving in the legislature. It was a painful exercise, so I've been told, and that's why they're hesitant. And that's it. It might. I somewhat agree with everybody that's spoken on this, and the fact that there is added cost to infrastructure needs for counties and towns to meet. And I also agree with Representative Conley in the fact that the earmarking is not a good deal. The tipping amount to be earmarked for a certain purpose. Although I agree in principle with Representative Obermuller. I mean, the demand is there and it has to be recognized. It's just the funding, it probably needs to come from somewhere else besides this fund. But anyway, further discussion on this particular amendment proposed.
Mr. Chairman.
Josh.
Sorry.
We'll go with Josh first, and then we'll go to you, Representative Hallinan.
Sorry. For staff, I would need a little more direction on how the portion to the locals would be distributed. What kind of formula?
Mr. Chairman.
We'll take Representative Hallinan first, and then we'll go
sorry.
to
That's
Senator
fine.
Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm against this amendment because I think that there are better ways of funding these infrastructure needs, and I've got an amendment on how to do that. So I think this money should be put into the general fund that is in excess of the 19 million. So I'd be against this amendment as written. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Ellis.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I agree with the principle of it, but think we need to give a lot more thoughtful consideration to how it's worded. And so I think we need more time to work on that.
What I'm hearing is from the comments is that everybody agrees that there should be a capping, but the tipping and where it goes is the problem area. For the discussion on this amendment. Our question being called. This is the amendment that Representative Obermuller proposed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Okay. The no's sounded like they had it, but let's just make sure. All those that voted in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. Okay, no's have it. Further amendments on this bill. Representative Kenner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not sure how to wordsmith this but the concept would be similar to the discussion earlier where we wouldn't give the people that have already passed the tax anything in addition to what they've already approved. And so I guess I would almost defer it to LSO staff, whichever way might be the easiest, whether it's delay the implementation of the 2%. Maybe that's the easiest. So maybe that's my motion to delay that until such time as the other taxes go off. And I'm seeing some heads nod. So that would be my motion, sir.
Motion been made. Do I have a second? Second by Representative Conley. Discussion on this motion.
We'll ask Josh about it.
Staff to make sure, can we do that either? And I'm looking in either in 3915-104 or when it goes to the distribution to the locals, that we could have a time delineation for a period of time, 3 years, for example.
So, Mr.
Josh,
Chairman,
go ahead.
The way I'm envisioning it right now would be either in addition to Section 3 or a new Section 4. And this would probably still need to be conceptual. So if you guys come to an agreement and then give me permission to run it back past the chairman after that's done, but.
Thank you.
I think that would be acceptable to the committee. I just have a question of this particular area. You know, if we postpone this, who's to say that another county, another situation arises and we're, you know, is it going to clean it up in 4 years? Or are we going to have the same problem with the different players in 4 years?
I would say no, because they'll know that they get a guarantee of 2%.
Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, I think too that if we put a time delineation in it, then counties, I mean, if they choose to do it, then they are going to be taxing themselves up to that 15%, but they'll know about it.
Mm-hmm. Further discussion on this amendment? Question on the amendment?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor of this proposed amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it, clearly. Josh, if we can get to work on that, basically delaying this implementation. And then you'll come up with something and present it to both Chairman Madden and myself before the session, and we can make sure that flies with the committee. Other amendments proposed?
On the bill.
Further discussion on the bill? Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, I'm going to recommend an amendment to that is not going to be very popular with our crowd here, I'm afraid. And that is that.
Be brave.
That on line 1 or line 2, where it says to the Wyoming tourism account, that and all the rest of that paragraph be deleted and that it be replaced by to the general fund. And I would say that.
What page were you on, Representative?
On page 3.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Page 3.
I got you.
I believe that it's not appropriate that we be creating more coffee cans to put money in from our budget. And I think that the budget, the Appropriations Committee and the budget of the legislature is the appropriate place for this money to go. So that's why I would propose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion's been made. Do I have a second? You might be right, Representative Hallinan. That might not be a popular amendment. You know, along those lines, I can support what my co-chairman mentioned about the funding of this department. Serving on appropriations for 6 years when we had money, we allocated more money to the Department of Tourism because of the efforts that they were making and the payback that it was producing. But then when money was short, it was one of the first departments cut because it's low-hanging fruit, is what we like to call it. It's not a necessity service that the state provides, yet, as my co-chairman mentioned, it's a major player in our source of revenue for the state. And we should probably be treating the department like that. And so getting off the cyclical nature that my co-chairman mentioned is dead spot on as far as I'm concerned. And I think this is a good bill in that effort of getting it off of general fund and still having appropriations. And the legislature approved those expenditures, but getting that budget off of general fund and off that cyclical manner that my co-chairman so aptly mentioned. So that amendment dies on fail of second. Representative Sweeney, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did the implementation amendment deal with the counties that do not have a lodging tax? Do you feel that that covered those counties, like Sheridan County? Evidently, Sheridan, the city, must have a lodging tax, but the county does not.
All do now.
So did that amendment, do you feel covered that?
Yeah, I think if this bill were to go forward, they would all have a statewide lodging tax. I mean, that's the effort. And so I think the amendment would cover that. I mean,
Okay.
I think we're okay there.
Okay.
For the
Thank you.
discussion on, yes, Representative Hallinan, another popular amendment.
I have another amendment, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Thank you. It's 3915-211. Double I, B, triple big I, line 2 and line 3. It's not in this bill, but it's an addition. It's an issue I think that has been brought up by a few people here. And it's the issue of the extra expenses that are due to the impact of all these tourists in a community. And this bill would only, this amendment would only provide for those communities where they have sufficient revenue, where they have $500,000 or up to $2 million. And it says that the distribution of the money that they get from tourism money, from the 4 million or 2 million, whatever they get. I don't know how much they get in Jackson, but I presume that it's a pretty large number. Currently, the law states that 10% should be deposited to the general fund of the taxing agency, which is the county or the city, and that 30% be put into a fund that covers items like parking, et cetera, capital improvements to the community. And this amendment would change the 10% that goes to the general fund of the taxing agency to 20% and lower the amount that goes for parking, et cetera, those kind of expenses to 20%. So it would not touch the amount that goes to the tourism agency in the county, but it would change the 40% that now goes 30% to the infrastructure area of the tourism business and would increase the amount that goes to the general fund of the county. And they could use that money to pay for the police officers. And I can tell you that as a physician, we had a lot of tourism coming into our county, and those people did not pay very well. And consequently, that's an additional burden on the hospital and the physicians in that community. So I think the general fund would be the appropriate place to put this change to allow a 10% increase to the general fund in these well-touristed counties or cities, to increase that to 20% into the general fund and lower the amount that goes to the capital construction start of the business of dealing with tourism. So that's my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, motion been made. Second.
Second.
Representative Connolly.
I'm seconding it.
Okay. Representative Connolly seconds the motion. Discussion on the motion.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Connolly.
I'm reading the Green Book, and honestly, I wish we had it in front of us because that there is that 30% is very specifically limited, although it does it includes, but is not limited to public transportation, parking, public restrooms. It's very specific. And we did hear that there's the possibility of the need for other kinds of things, including police protection, things like that. Changing the percentages from 10 and 30 to 20, 20 and 20? That's all that this is doing to give the county a bit more flexibility.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, this was brought about because of Teton County. And if you remember, historically, Teton County voted this down. And it took years to rebuild the trust to get it back. Lodging tax is very fragile. And I would urge you to vote against this because I don't think you want to muddy this water, and I don't think you want to go there. And thank you for the latitude, Mr. Chair.
Okay. For the discussion on the amendment. Ready for the vote? Okay. Question on the amendment. All those in favor of Representative Hallinan's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Noes have it. Amendment fails. Further amendments on the bill. Back on the bill? Question on the bill. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Josh?
One more thing I don't know if anyone thought about is the Department of Revenue had recommended a delayed effective date.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded?
Be January 1, 2020.
Yes. I was on page 9 at the end. Okay. Good catch, Josh. Thank you. I had it on my notes. Didn't see it. Okay, back on the bill. Roll call on the bill. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Jeez. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. That's why you're there. I'm 100% today. All right. All those in favor of this motion? We're talking about the implementation date being moved from July 1st, 2019 to January 1st, 2020. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Now, no further discussion on this bill, I hope. Okay, roll call on the bill.
All right, Mr. Chairman, this is for 19 LSO 130 as amended. Senator Case? Senator Ellis?
Aye.
Senator Kinski?
No.
Senator Wasserberger? Representative Connolly?
Aye.
Representative Dayton?
Aye.
Representative Murphy? Representative Hallian?
No.
Representative Kinner?
Aye.
Representative Larson, excused. Representative Obermueller?
Aye.
Representative Paxton?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Madden?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Peterson?
Aye.
That passed.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all the public comment and testimony, discussion committee. We know there's a little bit of work to be done on this, and we'll get that to you as soon as Josh gets us the wording for that, and maybe that might clarify things a little bit on that bill. Next up is the optional municipal tax. Do we take a quick break before we?
Yes.
Let's do that. Let's take a quick 15-minute break. We'll be back here at 20 after, and we'll pick up on optional municipal tax. Let's try to round up our committee members out there in the hall and we'll get this train going again.
Such mess. Messy, messy, messy.
Okay. All right. We'll get this started again. Next up on the agenda is the optional municipal sales or optional municipal tax. This is working draft point 2. I think there's copies over there for the public, and I think committee members, you've got the latest draft of this bill. If we have Mr. Josh, if you want to come forward and explain, give us a little history on this and remind us of what we're trying to do here and bring the committee up to speed on this bill, and then we'll discuss it further.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So this bill started last year at the end of last interim. We considered pretty much the exact same bill, and then you saw this draft also up in Buffalo, and it has not changed since then. What this does is gives cities and towns an optional up to 1% tax. They can use it for general revenue, for a specific purpose, or for economic development. They can do it in quarters of 1%. So feasibly, they could do 1/4% for a general purpose and 1/4% for a specific purpose. It's pretty broad that way, and makes clear that it's in addition to any of the county-wide taxes. And again, it hasn't really changed both since last year or since you saw it earlier this year. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions from the committee for Josh? Okay. All right. Thank you, Josh.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, the Corporations Committee did not take this bill up, and we didn't have a vote on it. We figured that it was kind of a game of chicken, and that Revenue Committee had the last meeting, so we left it for the Revenue Committee.
Well, thank you. You'll let us wear the black hat. It's okay. That's fine. All right. Let's have some testimony on this bill. First of all, we'll take state agencies. Anybody from state agencies out there that like to testify on this bill? Come on up, Director. You'll be the star today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Limit my comments to the administration of the bill. We will need, once again, some time to make something like this happen. I believe it has a July 1 effective date. I'd really like the same consideration to moving that maybe to January of 2020. It's also going to have some level of fiscal impact because we'll have to have some programming changes done. The system itself is already in place, and the coding for identifying municipalities is already there. It is more activating the online filing and ensuring that everything is working properly. So it isn't as big an issue as it would be for some of the other things, because we contemplated this potential years ago when the system was rewritten. but it is something that will take a little bit of time for testing and making sure that it's ready to go. The other component of it, that's going to be somewhat complex, is that when you're talking about municipal level taxes, you're going to need fairly well-defined boundaries as to what businesses are included within the boundaries. We have some experience with that today because lodging is structured that way. But it is, when you're talking about all businesses, we'll need to work with the county assessors to ensure that we have the appropriate businesses coded properly for the jurisdiction, that sort of thing. And I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for the director? None. Thank you. Anybody else from the state agencies that would like to testify? Let's take local governments next. Anybody from the towns or counties that would like to testify on this bill? Come on up.
Come on down. Oops.
Welcome to the Revenue Committee.
Thank you.
Be sure and identify yourself, and so
Thank you,
we
Mr.
know who you are.
Chairman. My name is Judy Johnstone. I'm a council member from the town of Burns. I will be very brief. I thank you all for taking time to listen. The only communities for which this would be a viable option are the larger ones. The small ones, such as I represent, don't have a hope. And yet, the larger communities are generally the shopping hubs for their counties. So those of us who are in small communities are pretty much required to shop in the larger hubs. And so this would be us paying a tax for something that we didn't vote for, that we didn't like, that we didn't want. Whereas with the 6 penny, it's a countywide thing. I am in Burns. We passed the 6 penny in Laramie County. Wherever in the county I shop, I'm paying myself. I wouldn't be doing that with this option. The alternative to me, and I think it's always good to speak for or against something like this, but it's also helpful to offer an option. And I know that there is a current limit on bonding, but I think that perhaps a bond might be a more appropriate way to do a lot of the things that I hear the larger communities wanting to do. That limit may or may not need to be addressed depending on the size of the community. In Burns, we couldn't bond a match for a new truck because we don't have much in the way of assessed value. But the larger communities could bond and build whatever they wanted with the understanding that it would be their residents that would be paying for it because it would be to their benefit. So I appreciate your consideration. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you leave, any questions for the councilman?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Council member, welcome. It's good to see you as always.
It's good to see you.
Just on the question of the small communities and what they can do for resources, you know, on the capital facilities tax, typically that's not directed by population. So usually the small communities come to the table and they're given a disproportionate amount under that in order to get their buy-in on that capital facilities tax. Or have you been able to get anything out of the surrounding communities that brings, you know, some dollars back home, such as money for a truck?
Councilman?
Thank you, Senator. You and I have had this conversation a number of times, haven't we, on the WAM board? Burns is very lucky. We have been able to get money for projects. I am a grant writer, and so we have been able to handle things like that. My concern is less for the town of Burns than it is for many of the other smaller communities who don't have the availability of someone who knows how to write a grant. And so that's, my concern is not for Burns. My concern is for statewide small communities. And as I said, I make a joke about us not being able to bond for a truck. It's true, but it's amusing, and it always gets a laugh, so that works.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Follow up if I may, but back to the cap tax. Have you had success in negotiating? You don't need to write a grant to get a goodly chunk of the cap tax, including for some items that are in the general fund that ordinarily be bought through the general fund, that you can use cap tax money to buy those things, and then that opens up some room in the general fund. Have you had success doing that on behalf of Burns with the cap tax?
We have not had to do that.
Okay. Because they just give it to you?
No, because we received a large number of grants, and we've done quite well. As I said, it's in Senator that there are many, many small communities. And as I said, you and I have had this discussion a number of times. I'm all for the large communities being able to do whatever they can. But this is something that will benefit a small percentage of the municipalities in the state of Wyoming. We have 4 businesses in Burns, and I think one of them may collect a sales tax. The others don't. A bank doesn't collect sales tax. So it's my concern, as I said, is not for the town of Burns. We're okay. My concern is for statewide, the small communities.
Further questions for the councilman? Representative Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming to testify. Let me ask you this question. You said that you have to shop in the larger communities and that it is unfair that you would then be taxed. But don't you agree, since we as legislators have cut the funding for cities and counties, et cetera, and they need options available to them, for example, for street repairs and infrastructure, when you're shopping in that community, you're using their streets,
Absolutely.
infrastructure, et cetera. So don't you agree they may need funding, and that is not an undue tax on you necessarily?
Well, in Laramie County, we all vote for the 5th penny, which is what everybody pretty much uses for their roads. And we all vote for that. So we all use all of the county roads. So we are supporting the roads.
Okay. Further questions? You know, just a thought as you were speaking, Councilman, I come from a small community myself, and what you're saying is accurate. It's spot on. I mean, but there are other programs that the state offers that that recognize that fact that a sales tax in a small community really doesn't generate much. And so why would you pass this type of an optional?
It would be ludicrous.
Yeah, it would be funny.
That too.
But, you know, there are those cases in small towns where they have those enterprise funds like garbage collection, the things that we can pay for and pay for ourselves. But when you get into larger projects like streets or that truck that you were talking about in your bonding capacity, it's just not there. We understand that. But we passed a bill last session that addressed some of those infrastructure needs through the SLIB board. And I think it was tailored to our smaller communities, a portion of it.
It was.
And
so
we
appreciate it.
Look
Thank you.
for that. The rules are being drafted as we speak. And so we recognize that fact. But at the same time, what Representative Furphy alluded to is correct in that, you know, even though I'm from a small town, I go to my neighboring towns and do my shopping and whatever. And it's nice to have them there, and I should probably participate in the infrastructure that I use while I'm there. So I understand that. But there are other things that, to be fair, small towns, we have in my particular community, really no justification to have paved streets. Yet we do.
don't either.
Yet we do.
Well, we have two.
Well, good. But yet we do have paved streets.
One of them used to be a state highway.
Yeah, we got one of those too. But we do have paved streets, and the point is, through grants, through loan interest loans, other programs that. So the legislature, I think, in the state recognizes that with small communities, and so there are other things out there. But yeah, you're right. This bill will not probably benefit our small communities, but there are other things out there that do benefit our smaller communities. That really, honestly, coming from a small community, I can say this is that we are subsidized by taxpayers from around the state.
Absolutely. And as I said, I'm all for other communities, the larger communities, being able to do something like this. Frankly, another one of my concerns, which I didn't mention initially, is that if, especially in this current era, if a large community's residents were to approve, say, for example, and I'm just going to call it what I call it myself, the seventh penny. Then when the sixth penny, what would be their real motive? That altruism doesn't run deep when taxes and money are tight. And what would be their motive to then turn around and vote for a sixth penny, which is county-wide, if they've already voted for what they have? And it's a failing we all have. I've got mine. But I think a lot of the smaller communities don't have the option to have theirs.
Okay. If no other questions, appreciate you being here and providing testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time.
Anybody else that would like to come forward and speak on this particular bill? Come on up. I think the microphone is still on, so have a chair and you can introduce yourself for the record. And since this is being live streamed throughout the state, we want to know who you are and what you have to say.
Okay, my name is Ralph Bartles. I'm the mayor of Burns. And I just have a short prepared statement. First of all, good morning to you and all of the committee. And thank you for allowing us to come in and testify. I'll be pretty brief. The approval of this proposal would be a de facto support of taxation without representation. In other words, the larger communities within the community itself could vote for the tax or against it as they chose. However, people who don't live within the town or city limits of that municipality would not be allowed to vote. So to me, that is taxation without representation. I'm sure that there are arguments against what I'm saying, and that's fine. The sixth penny supports entire counties. We in Laramie County, at least, and I don't think this is true among the whole state, meet and set up the projects to be paid for with the sixth penny. And each small community that's involved in this process gets a percentage of the sixth penny to pay for projects. And we've been through this conveyance, able to do some projects in Burns that otherwise we would not have been able to do, even with the grants that Judy has gotten for us. I think that in some of the communities, I've heard that the counties are not all that willing to share with the smaller communities especially. And maybe that needs to be addressed in those counties. I can't do that. And while it's always good to offer input to the legislative process, it can also be helpful to offer an alternative, which in this case, Judy has already mentioned, bonding to do some of these projects. And again, maybe some of the bonding amounts would have to be addressed by the legislature in order for that to work for some of the municipalities. And that is pretty much what I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you, Mayor, for being here and providing testimony. Any questions for the mayor from the committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else that would like to speak on this bill? Let's hear from our counties.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Pete Obermueller, Executive Director of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. With me is Commissioner Novotny from Johnson County, also the chairman of our revenue committee at the WCCA. You all have heard our arguments on this. Obviously, we're opposed to this bill. There's a couple of things we wanted to highlight a little bit different from or in addition to our testimony in Buffalo that I think might help. Just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, as you remember, the crux of our issue with this bill is not so much an argument with the municipalities with regard to their need for revenue for infrastructure or whatever else. That's not the issue. It's not the issue of providing tools for new revenue. The issue is this bill has distracted all of us from finding a way to do that in a way that doesn't simultaneously harm the counties and the small towns. And there are ways to do that. Corporations Committee has taken up one with respect to municipal stormwater drainage. The councilwoman from Burns mentioned another options. There are other options. We'll offer a couple others with respect to what the real problem is here with local option taxes as well. But the fact is that there is really no way that this tool would not end up a tool that's solely for the large communities to the detriment of everybody else. So let me put a little bit of, we had an interesting discussion about this in corporations a couple days ago. I want to just put a few numbers to this just so that you can think about it in your heads. So let's take a couple of counties that are already either at 5 pennies or 6 pennies. So Natrona County, for instance, is sitting at 5 pennies or 6 pennies. They're sitting at 5 pennies. And so is Campbell, sitting at 5 pennies currently. And is that right? Yep, 5 pennies. And Laramie County is at 6 pennies. So just walk through this with me first. We'll start with Laramie County, sitting at 6 pennies right now. If this bill were to pass and the municipality were allowed to add another penny to that on their own, then the citizens of Cheyenne would be paying 7 pennies, the statutory maximum. First of all, no county has ever gotten past 6 pennies. Just the voters seem to have put a cap at 6 for these local option taxes. But let's just assume that they pass it here in Cheyenne. Then Cheyenne is at 7 pennies, and everywhere else in the county, everywhere else is paying 6. When a county-wide option comes up again, the county-wide option is going to be for projects outside of the city, as the city's already taken care of themselves at that point. So now you're asking the citizens of Cheyenne to go to 8 pennies beyond the current statutory maximum for projects everywhere else, not in Cheyenne. That's a pretty big ask in the case of local options, which, we heard that the lodging tax is fragile, mostly paid by people who don't even live here. These are fragile, right? If we're going to ask, so the same math works out, just a little bit smaller scale for Natrona and Campbell. We would be asking, Campbell's at 5 pennies. Gillette passes one that takes the Gillette residents to 6, and everywhere else is at 5, and the county comes up and we're asking the Gillette residents to go to 7 on behalf of Wright. I don't think that works out. So it simply consolidates that revenue, Mr. Chairman. The next one I want to address before I turn it over to Commissioner Novotny, who I think has an interesting story to tell. The narrative has been that somehow counties and small towns prevent the bigger cities from doing what they want to do. But I challenge any of you to find empirical evidence of that fact. 2 days ago in this committee, the Mayor of Cheyenne, who I want to stipulate right away, the Mayor of Cheyenne and I have been friends for a long time. I have an enormous amount of respect for the Mayor of Cheyenne and what she's trying to accomplish in the city. So let me just put that out right up front. But the Mayor of Cheyenne's big argument was, we have to do this kind of thing because Cheyenne needed a fire station and it was lumped with other projects. And so then it failed. Well, Mr. Chairman, that particular proposition in Laramie County, that vote was 50.78 against to 49.22 for. I would argue that there were a lot of factors that played into that vote. And Mr. Chairman, I would mention that if you look at the city precincts alone in that particular proposition, the Cheyenne residents, that particular proposition only had a difference of 171 votes. I would argue that it wasn't the county that was the problem there. What the issue is, what this bill is trying to do is solve an entirely separate problem, which is perhaps on that 6-penny ballot, the items were grouped together poorly. And we ought to consider maybe other ways of grouping 6-penny ballots so that you're not voting for a gym and a fire station at the same time. That's a discussion that could be had, but we're all distracted by this thing. To put another finer point on that issue in terms of counties holding them back, I asked Commissioner Novotny to speak for a moment because of what they just passed in Johnson County and how that looks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you may or may not be aware, but 50% of Johnson County's population lives within the municipality of the city of Buffalo, and the remainder of the population lives outside in the county. In 2014, we successfully passed, for the first time after multiple attempts, a special purposes tax for a library expansion in Buffalo and renovations of the library in KC. It was a $3 million project that would have been paid off in roughly 18 months. It narrowly passed. In 2018, we passed a second special purpose tax after retiring that tax that specifically benefited the city of Buffalo. It was to repair 5 streets. It's $7 million and will be paid off in roughly 4 years, passed overwhelmingly. When you write the ballot questions correctly and you work collectively between your city and your county, we can find the funding mechanisms. But a municipal only tax is not a replacement for the 105. You'll remember that not long ago we were at $160 million as a replacement for direct distribution. As Mr. Obermuller alluded to, we're losing sight on what we need to. If you're concerned about city-on-city violence and their inability to pass a specific tax under the toolbox that we already have, I would encourage you to look at lowering the threshold for getting that on the ballot, particularly in cases like Fremont County, where you have Riverton on land or violence. We just don't see that statewide. When people work collectively, the ballot questions are written well and the projects can be defended to the voters. Thank you.
So finally, Mr. Chairman, just last point is, I think I mentioned it a couple days ago, the question of whether or not to allow the big cities to go their own way and raise their own taxes is a legitimate question, and I think is a legitimate policy question for the legislature. The issue is that you would have to move forward with your eyes wide open about what that does in terms of your relationship with all the local governments in the state. You could do it, and you would see this consolidation of revenue, and then you would see the council member and us up in front of you in appropriations to try to deal with that issue. You could mitigate it in some ways if you wanted to. You could write into the Madden matrix that if a city implemented its own tax this way, that the direct distribution that went to that city was reallocated to everybody else in that county. You could put in a restriction that if you have your city only tax to deal with your own infrastructure, that you're no longer eligible for SLIB grants. There are ways that you could deal with it where you allow the big cities to go their own way. That's okay. but you have to fundamentally then change the way that you view the rest of us at that point. Because we just don't see any other way that this would not result in us in a crisis that we're not in currently. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to both of you for being here and providing that testimony. Questions from the committee for these two? Representative Furphy, we'll take you first, and then we'll come back to our co-chairman. Got it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we've had this discussion before, but let me say, I don't think this is a replacement for the current 105 million direct distribution. We're not talking about that, because that would be very unfair to the smaller communities. All we're asking for here with this bill is to provide another option to, and I admit, the larger communities. But I'm going to use our community as an example. Laramie was cut a lot this last session. And it has affected the services that our community can provide. So all we're asking for is an option. We're already at the 6-cent sales tax in Albany County. We've agreed to tax ourselves. And your point, Mr. Obermueller, that 6 cents may be the cap. Well, let's let our voters decide that. Let's not, us as legislators, say, well, that's the maximum. If our voters in our community want to pass a higher tax to get infrastructure, whatever that we may need to fund, we should give them the opportunity to do that. That's all I'm saying.
Response,
Chairman,
Mr. Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Furphy, I don't disagree with anything you just said. I am not arguing that Laramie doesn't need revenue. What I'm asking you to consider is that if you do give it to your citizens in Laramie the option to try to go to 7, and they do, then Rock River and the rest of the county is paying 6. And when they come later with needs for the county or for Rock River, then the citizens of Laramie will have to agree to go to 8, while everyone else is at 7, in order to pay for projects not in Laramie. What I would like to do, what we would like to do, is work with you on ways where Laramie can get the infrastructure that they need in a way that doesn't simultaneously hurt the rest of your county.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. And I've got that answer, I think. And let me just preface it a little bit with why this little amendment will work. And I won't introduce it as an amendment yet, but just try to get you thinking about it so you can argue with me later. But, you know, in the county that Mr. Novotny came from, the process was one in which the city, the largest, we have one large city, one small town. But the large city came to the county and said, we'd like to have a county-wide tax, all right? And, you know, that way you can put your items in there, but they wanted street improvements. That was long and short of it. Well, there isn't many counties that get along so well as they do in Johnson County, because the city or the town, the small town said, well, go ahead. You know, you guys gave us all the money for streets back when we had consensus money. And so we owe it to you, you know, to just go along with this. And the county apparently said, well, we're okay with it too. And we voted on it. And like Mr. Novotny said, it passed overwhelmingly. No problem, right? But let's talk about a county to the east of us or west of us, okay? They have one big town, one small town. But when you got 3 incorporated entities like the county and 2 towns, they all have to agree to it. So you got one little town that says no. And we could have had that little town that said no too, and it would never happened, okay? So with that preface, what I will propose at the proper point is at the top of page 3. Okay. And I just wrote B prime in there because I'm I guess, mathematician. But anyway, we have B on page 2, then we got C on page 3, but B prime is in the middle of those two. And it's going to read something like this: the tax authorized by this paragraph shall be proposed only in the event a county-wide tax request has been declined. Okay? Now that takes care, that gives you the option of not getting cut out. Okay? But if you have somebody that wants to bow their neck, or some entity that wants to bow their neck and say, no, we're not going to go along with it just for the fun of it, because we have to go to town and buy stuff, that there is a recourse for the municipality to do what they really think needs to be done. So do you believe this would be a good amendment or not?
Representative or Mr. Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Co-Chairman Madden, I appreciate where your head's at. That's at least starting to move towards what the actual problem is, which is, there is empirical evidence of this, where cities look at something another city wants and says, well, we're not going to benefit from that. In fact, it was interesting in corporations, the example of Torrington was brought up, which is a perfect example. That's the one that's come up a lot. Torrington wanted to have something, and other cities didn't want it to happen. So it wasn't the county was fine. So having not seen the amendment and having just thought about it for 10 seconds, and I'll let Commissioner Novotny speak too, it's a step in the right direction, but we got to think about it further because when we talk about who, if it's denied, who denied it, perhaps the county supported it, but it's the other cities that denied it, right? And that's the case that happened in Goshen. And then all of a sudden, then a city can do it by themselves, and that hurts the county, even though they approved. So, that doesn't quite get there, Mr. Chairman. But I like where your head's at. I don't want to speak against it too harshly, because that's starting to that's starting to look at the actual problem, which is, right now to put something on the ballot, you have to have agreement of the county, and I believe it's 2/3 of the cities to put it on the ballot. Yeah, but recall that there are other ways of doing that. You could do a sliding scale based on the number of communities. That makes so that you don't have that veto authority. You could do something more like the consensus grant program worked. The consensus grant program was you had to agree on what to spend it on with the county and a majority of the cities making up a certain percentage of the population. So that was different. That shifted more of the I guess the authority toward highly populated cities, so that they couldn't be necessarily held hostage, for lack of a better term, by other smaller communities. There are other ways to attach it, but that gets closer to the issue. Commissioner Novotny, sorry.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I would also recommend either a mechanism within the good co-chairman's amendment that allowed for whether it was a sliding scale or, in fact, the formula using the consensus model, because you do have some counties that have the dynamic of multiple municipalities, and then you have many that do not. And so you are defeating the purpose of trying to get an agreement under the current mechanism that you already have. If you can just say, well, we're not even going to try to negotiate or work out the differences, just vote us down and we'll backdoor it using this new mechanism. It could happen.
You don't really think, Mr. Novotny, that the municipalities are really that evil, do you?
Mr. Chairman, as a commissioner who lives inside an incorporated municipality, who has the widest street in town and has the most potholes, who will not benefit from that recently passed tax. No, I don't hope and believe, but you never know. Dynamics are interesting. And it would be nice we do benefit from a very strong relationship. And the mayor of Buffalo did go to the mayor of Casey and offer when they were putting this package together and say, do you need a project on there? Our concern always has been is when you allow these taxes to get too large and they go out over too long of a time frame, that they really would impede, number one, because you tie the tax up. Number two, you scare the voters away from future projects when they feel like, gosh, we just paid this off and you're asking for more. Our success was because that first project, we paid it off on time. We did it early, so that the voters really got the opportunity to see that, yes, this is a tax that has a specific purpose and it's a tax that will go away.
Okay. Further questions for these two? I just add that, this is a pretty high bar. We know that. We've all had those votes on taxes that have been defeated over and over and over again. So this is a pretty high bar. I certainly agree with the aspect that this provides another tool, but I see your point as well, that this might be just a distraction. And it's really not going to help even the larger communities that much because of the high bar that is there. So you mentioned the idea of lowering the threshold or, and expound on that just a little bit more, the 2/3 required, relaxing that somewhat. Ideas like that is, I think, what this committee would like to hear. If this is not going to be the help that we think it's going to be to even our larger communities because of the high threshold that's required, what are those options specifically?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So there's a separate sort of policy philosophical argument about our heavy reliance at the local level on voter approval of taxes. It's for a separate day, but to the extent that we keep that right now, there's it seems to me that we might be able to overcome some of the angst about this by working on getting proposals to the voters a little bit more easily. So in a county like Representative Furphy's, you have to have the county and you need to have both cities approve it. And perhaps that should stay that way. I don't think you want to X out anybody, but in a county like Bighorn, where you have 9 municipalities and the county, perhaps it's too high of a bar to say that you need to get 2/3 of those cities to agree. Maybe as the municipalities expand, you sort of lower that threshold. That's one possibility. I would want to speak for the cities on how they would feel about that. The other one, we mentioned that there's precedent in place for at the consensus grant program. You could match those rules where you have the county and the cities that represent a percentage of the population, so that things can get on the ballot a little bit easier. That's been the struggle on the front end. That's been the struggle, is making sure that things can get on the ballot, so we avoid this sort of thing where one city is trying to hold another city hostage. Then there's a second one that I think warrants a lot of discussion. We've never had this in statute. I'm unsure how I feel about putting something like this in statute, but there is a robust conversation among all the counties and municipalities about how do you set up a 6-penny special purpose tax? Do you have one? You have 6 pennies and you have 15 projects under that, and it's all or nothing? Or do you separate them out into separate projects and vote on them as a menu? And how do you group those together? And this is where I think, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think where the mayor of Cheyenne is coming from is she felt like the projects were grouped inappropriately, and so that cost her a fire station. That may be true. So maybe there's some merit to discussing whether or not infrastructure projects should be grouped together, parks, recreation projects should be grouped together, those sorts of things. I don't know, but those are other options that could be discussed. The way it is right now is that they just sit in a room together and they hash it out, and they all agree to it, and then they're not allowed to go out and support it. They can only educate. So that's a challenge.
The consensus block grant was, I thought, a great concept, but the reminder is that's when we had money on the state level. This is a response to tighter budgets and no money, and so that's why we refer to it as an optional tool. But that consensus block grant was excellent, and even in a county like Bighorn with 9 communities, I saw those communities get together the mayors and councils come together and decide, because the amount was so low, they had to vote and approve a project in Manderson that had a water problem. But the county or the cities came together, the towns came together, and it was a great way to spend government dollars. I mean, efficient and effective, and hit the target and where the need was, not just the wants. So,
Mr. Chairman,
it's when we had money.
You reminded me, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just for 1 second. I'm reminded in this conversation about, Johnson County gets along with the cities, and there's sort of this narrative that's similar to the way the polls work out with our congressional representatives, where Congress as a whole is rated, lower than dirt, but your own congressman is rated high. It's sort of the similar dynamic that plays out, because I could take a 30,000-foot view, I can see it a little bit differently, where our county gets along, everybody else must hate each other. It's not really how it works. Most of the counties, in fact, all of the counties and all of the cities generally strive pretty hard to get along with each other, and are generally successful at that. There are one-off challenges in personality and in policy that happens all the time. But as an overall matter, I would just caution that both consensus and this is set up to have the local government sit down together and work these things out, which is precisely what you all have wanted us to do on everything for a long, long time. Are there challenges? Do we lose a fire station every now and again? Yeah, but it's a process that has worked.
Okay, further questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else that would like to provide testimony on this particular bill? Let's hear from our municipalities. Welcome, Mr. Kaysen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Rick Kaysen. I serve as Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Wow. What a discussion. I'm not sure if I have targets on my back, my sides, or whatever. So I would like to take some of your time. I will not say I'm going to be brief, because I don't think I can be brief. So I ask for your indulgence, and I'm going to plow some old ground that has been discussed in prior years as well. So first of all, thank you for your consideration on this. Tax discussion, talking about taxes, new taxes, increase. It is not a fun topic. It's not a popular topic. But the needs of our municipalities, as well as state government, as well as county governments, districts, they're real. And if we had all the funds that we needed in the world, we wouldn't be here, we'd be doing something else. But we have to address the real world as we have to manage it as well. So a little bit of background. Where did this municipal option tax consideration come from? You'll remember in the and again, I apologize for plowing some older ground, but the WAM produced a municipal finance report in 2016 when the discussion was about revenues are declining for the state and the trickle-down effect to those that you provide funds to. And what are some thoughts, what are some considerations? From that, and leading into the 2017 legislative session, lots of discussion. Out of the 2017 legislative session, WAM was asked to produce and provide some recommendations, some thoughts, some considerations that the legislative body may wish to do. That resulted in the municipal finance municipal finance report volume 2 2017, and that included an option of the municipal option tax. So again, a little bit of history right there. The WAM membership at its June annual meeting, June of this year, unanimously approved a resolution supporting the municipal option tax. Okay, the concept of the municipal option tax. I will acknowledge, and it was unanimously approved, I will also acknowledge, as we've heard earlier today from our great friends in Burns, that it may not be, there's a little bit of, I don't want to use the word division, but I can't think of another, uncertainty as far as what this might mean to all. So again, to say it's 100 lockstep, I will not say that, because there are concerns about that. You've heard me say this before, you've seen this in our print, all Wyoming citizens, as well as visitors, are served directly or indirectly by a municipality. whether it's coming in for health reasons, it's shopping, it's purchasing, recreational activities. People migrate to municipalities, no different from any other states as well. The bill here, and we haven't talked a lot about the bill, so again, I'm going to beg for your indulgence as I come back with some comments specific to the bill. It is well defined. It identifies the purposes that a municipality must address and how those funds can be used. This is an alternative. It is an option for municipalities concerned. It's not a shall, but it is an option when revenues are difficult to obtain and the needs still remain. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will go to my comments. And again, you've heard this before, but I think it merits discussion to get back to the purpose of the bill. This option allows Wyoming cities in a town the ability to generate local revenue, to meet those public service requirements and obligations that our municipalities have. And generating local revenue is commonly referred to as own source capacity. Own source capacity. This allows cities and towns the option to inform its residents of its needs through the ballot and through informational meetings, much like is done with the current optional taxes, 5th, 6th, and 7th pennies. Same process. It's incumbent on the municipality to prepare the ballot and help educate and inform the voters. The very important component of this bill, and this is something that the legislature, this committee has talked on many occasions, it goes to the vote of the people. Those that are willing to tax themselves within that municipal boundary have the ability to say yay or nay. This is something that is local. I understand about the comments of taxation without representation, and I'd like to address that in some of my closing comments. This is an additive. We have to be honest about this. This is an additive. It is not a replacement for direct distribution funding, which we've talked about before as well, or a replacement of the excuse me, the other optional taxes. We've heard from our smaller towns on several occasions. The majority of our smaller cities and towns, approximately 50% of our 99 incorporated municipalities, have populations of less than 500. And then we can go up to 4,000. But my comment here, the purpose of this comment, is the tax base is not there, or it's very small to really do any kind of replacements of any direct distribution or any other replacement of optional taxes. The state of Wyoming has restrictions on local authority to be able to raise revenue. And this has been reported previously. We are the most reliant on state aid of any states, and we are the least, we have the least ability to raise our own money locally. Okay? And it's been that way for a long time. And as we've heard before, in the good revenue times, no problem. We're all happy. But in those difficult revenue times, then we're all struggling. And I underscore all. We all struggle. This initiative is separate from the county optional taxes that we've heard about this morning, and it allows cities and towns to act more independently. This practice of a municipal option tax is utilized in many other states, is close to the neighbor to the south and as far away as some of southeastern cities, southeast part of our country. And I've had discussions with their representatives. I know this is anecdotally information, but they have had success with the municipal option tax to meet their needs and did not bring any awareness to me as far as what it may have harmed surrounding municipalities or close municipalities or other or the counties or parishes within that vicinity. So again, I recognize that's secondhand information, but again, I have nothing when I ask the question about being harming other local governments. We have heard about the unknowns, what the impact might be to other cities, towns, what it might mean to our counties. And this is not intended to harm anyone. It's intended to help the municipalities that wish to take this to the vote of the people. Excuse me. This may sound very callous, and I do apologize for it up front, but we've heard taxation without representation. But that's a reality that we live in wherever we go, whatever we do, whether we travel for leisure, we travel for business, we are going to be facing with some form of taxation where we had no voice on that particular thing. So again, it may sound callous, but I think it's something that's real that we just deal with on an everyday basis in our individual choices, our business choices, what have you. This was brought up a little bit earlier with the fine mayor of the city of Cheyenne, again in Corporations Committee, and I'm not speaking for her or on behalf of Mayor Orr, but she spoke about the needs. And again, it was about the fire departments or fire stations. Those are real. She also added on that since she was not able, or the municipality was not able to get funding for the first one, the next time the vote comes around with the growth of Cheyenne, she's probably looking at the need for a second fire station. But go beyond the fire station, it takes equipment, it takes personnel to, have that fire force ready to serve the community. So again, there are expectations, there are needs from our residents, and these do not go away. They're going to continue to grow as we continue to grow as municipalities, as counties, as state as well. I would like to offer this for a little bit of clarity because I've been involved in this as the former mayor of Cheyenne in this practice of again, back to the fire station. Good cooperation does exist. I will agree with the WCCA. Good cooperation exists across the state for the most part between counties and municipalities. And when the sixth penny was put together here in Laramie County, it is a collective effort by the governments, county and municipalities, to create the ballot. And they make the local decision of either to have a menu item ballot, item by item by item, or to group them. And when those groups are made, they're trying to put those in with common themes, common needs. And that doesn't work all the time. But that's a local decision that is agreed upon by the local governments. Does it work perfectly? No, but it's been a practice that has been in place, at least in this county, for a good number of years. And overall, it has worked favorably. Mr. Chairman of the committees, again, this is not a popular topic. I fully realize this, but it is a need. And I've used that term probably to excess this morning, but I would ask for your consideration on this particular bill to at least allow it to go to the full legislature for discussion. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll try to answer questions the committee may have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Kaysen? None. Okay, you must have explained yourself very well. Thank you for your testimony.
That or I have no chance in heck. One of the two. Thank you, committee.
Appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else from the public that would like to testify on this bill? Come on up, Mr. Moline. I was wondering when you were going to come up to the desk. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. As per my members' policy, we are against this bill. We want to keep the sales tax elections on a county-wide basis. Granted, the county residents do use the city infrastructure, but by putting a tax to the vote of the entire people, the feeling is that, yes, the majority of that money will probably go to, in the county where I live, it'll go to the larger municipality. However, some of that will come back to fulfill some infrastructure, some needs for the county, and it can all be done under one ballot. Our policy is to keep it as it is. As we've heard, it's not perfect, but it works the vast majority of the time. Does some things need to be tweaked? Perhaps, yes. But we want to keep the system the way it is. And I wonder if we start having, even though it's only up to a 1%, are we going to have that a municipality would put a sales tax on? A lot of our cities already, our residents, we already have a leakage problem of buying goods. Some towns just don't have the supply. They can't have what the people want, what they need. So you have a leakage problem. You look at the majority of our population, other than Lander, Riverton and Casper. The rest of our population is pretty much on the edge. And so there is a lot of leakages outside. And I wonder if increasing the tax, especially on the large ticket items, housing, furniture, things like that, could make the problem worse of what we already have. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee for Mr. Moline?
Thank you.
None, you're wearing us out. Thank you for being here. Any other public testimony? Come on up. One of our county commissioners, welcome.
Thank you.
Make sure that microphone is still on, and I think it is. It's not. You're going to have to press that button.
It's red.
There you go.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and committee members, I'm Buck Holmes. I'm chairman of the Laramie County Commission. I'm here to testify against this bill for the simple reason that I think it will be detrimental to the entire county. A lot of the testimony that we've heard today from the cities concerns a fire station. I have in front of me the ballot that we had in 2017, May 2nd, and two propositions failed. And on one of those propositions was the firehouse, etc. But also we lost $3.5 million to Laramie County. We lost $750,000 to town of Pine Bluffs, $1 million to the town of Burns, $80,000 to town of Albin, $350,000 to the town of Burns, $675,000 or $6.75 million to the city of Cheyenne for recreational facilities. That was Proposition 6. Proposition 7 was also turned down. This is the one that has $6 million to the city of Cheyenne for construction or renovation of a fire station and for purchases or refurbishment of engines. We also lost $300,000 to the town of Burns to complete a sewer line. We lost $700 million for a basketball court and volleyball court to the city of Cheyenne. We lost $1 million to Laramie County for emergency services, storage, and medical distribution for emergency management. We lost $40,000 to the town of Pine Bluffs to upgrade the town cemetery. We lost $200,000 to the town of Pine Bluffs to replace parking and surfacing at the Town Hall Community Center. We lost $200,000 to the town of Burns for the purchase of a dumpster, truck, and attachments. We lost $80,000 to the town of Albin to replace a current storage building. The reason I want to point this out is that not just the big cities lost on this, and I think probably you have mentioned that maybe it's the way the ballot is written, but I think those of us, everybody in Laramie County lost something on this ballot. And we have talked with the smaller, proportionately, the smaller municipalities got hurt worse than the town of Cheyenne did, especially the town of Burns. And I think if you just give the large cities the ability for 1 cent, I think the next time we come around with a countywide 6-penny proposition that we need for infrastructure in the county, we need for infrastructure in the town of Cheyenne, or for infrastructure in the smaller municipalities, I think the voters are already going to say, we already are doing the 6-penny, and we don't want to do the other one. And that is really is my worry about this, and I think this is the worry of all of the commissioners. And I think we would like to continue to work with all of the municipalities in Laramie County to do a 6-penny tax again, which is good for the entire community of Laramie County. And with that, I will quit. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your comments. Questions for the Commissioner? Appreciate you being here. Thank you for your testimony. Anybody else? Anybody else? Going once, twice. Oh. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. My name's Janine Jordan. I'm the city manager of Laramie. And I would just like to state for the record that the Laramie City Council's most recent resolution considering the municipal option tax was 100% supported by all 9 members of our council with respect to providing options to cities to float their own boat, so to speak. I would also like to share with you that Albany County voters in August renewed the 6th penny or the capital facilities tax by greater than a 2/3 margin, and then came back 2 months later and renewed the 5th penny tax, our 2nd penny of local option tax, also in excess of a 2/3 margin. I guess as a city manager, what I would say to you is the current taxation structure is insufficient to meet the needs of my community. My community has chosen by a vast majority to take advantage of every tax available to them, and we are clamoring for other options to meet the needs of our residents. I would urge you to pass this out to the floor for full consideration and not deny the residents of Laramie the option to continue floating their own boat. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on. Maybe we can see if we have any questions for you. Any questions for the city manager? None. Thank you for making the trip over. Anybody else? We've got a half an hour before we have to break for lunch, and so we want to talk about this bill. We'll close public testimony and appreciate those testimonies given and the information shared. It's good information, so we appreciate you being here. Committee, what's your Representative Kinner?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do have a question, and I'm not sure who could help me here, but could someone remind me of the bars that need to be, or the steps that need to be taken to access the 7th penny that's out there? Could anyone fill me in on that?
Go ahead, Mr. Obermuller. The requirements, the
right
2/3 and so on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Kinner. Yeah, it's so the 7th penny is the same as all the others. They're all actually local options. There's 5 possibilities, but it's capped at 3. So any community can have what we call a 5th penny, but that's a general purpose. You can have up to 2 of those. You can have 2 specific purpose, what we call the 6th penny, but you can have 2 of those, and you can have an economic development penny. You can have those in any combination. So you could have, theoretically, you could have 2 general purpose and an economic development. You could have 2 specific purpose and an economic development, any combination of those, as long as you don't go over 3. But the process to put them on the ballot is exactly the same for all of them.
Follow up. Good. Thank you. So really, there are tools out there that haven't been taken advantage of at this time. Would you agree with that?
Or Mr. Obermuller?
Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, yes, Representative Kinner. What I didn't mention in all of that is that on the local or on the general purpose, you don't have to do it in full penny increments. You do on the specific purpose. And on the economic development, you can do that in quarter penny increments. And this committee passed 2 years ago that, to my knowledge, no local government has taken advantage of yet, but has disaggregated all of those so that you can do them at different times without jeopardizing what you've already passed before. So you could add, in an off election cycle, you could ask your voters for an additional quarter penny that's not related to any of the other ones and not on the ballot at the same time. And if it fails, it doesn't affect your others. There are lots of options out there for local options taxes that haven't been fully tried.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Center case.
But none that get around the requirement that it be a countywide proposition.
Mr. Chairman, center case, you mean currently? I'm confused by that comment.
Currently.
I don't think that that's true, but I think I'm just misunderstanding what you're saying, Senator Case.
There's no way for a community to raise money on their own.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, that's true. That's true if you're talking about municipal only. They're all countywide. That's correct.
Further questions? Okay, let's have a discussion on the bill. Committee, what's your desire for this bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Conley makes the motion to move the bill.
Moved by Laramie. Big second by Fremont County.
Okay. And moved and seconded. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my view on this issue 4 years ago to today has really changed. 4 years ago, I was pretty much a no vote on it, thinking that, my community, as our manager talked about, tends to tax itself. I can only remember one tax maybe in 5 years that we voted down. You could correct me. I think it was the public transportation one. But other than that, we tax ourselves. I was really concerned that my community would be so different than other cities around the state if we have to tax ourselves. But then I sat on appropriations. And after a couple of years on appropriations and the real desire of our body to take municipalities off of the general fund and discussions with how can that possibly happen, the idea of localities kind of choosing what to tax themselves for kind of came to the top. And I've switched about 180 degrees from a no vote to a yes vote to let our communities decide and our citizens decide themselves whether or not to tax themselves. And one of the compromises was in this quarter penny increments that we've talked about over the past several months. And so I'm in favor of letting our municipalities choose to tax themselves. The issue regarding the counties, I just pulled up the data on our population in my particular county, and to take a look and see, okay, who is going to have this kind of undue taxation without representation? Although I disagree with that, because they're allowed. You live in the county, you can go shop wherever you want. You don't have to come to Laramie if you live in Albany County. You can go to Natrona, you can go to Carbon County, you can go wherever you want. But my county has 38,000 people in it. 33,000 of that 38 live in the city. For a ballot measure to get on for the county, you need the town of, or the incorporated municipality of Rock River with only 249 people to vote in favor of it. That's concerning to me. Those 33,000 people through their city council do not have the same ability to tax as the 5,000 people outside of those city limits. So for both of those reasons, I'm going to vote in favor of this.
Further discussion on the bill? Possible amendments?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I just, Fremont County, we have, obviously the land of Riverton. Did they really say violence earlier when they were talking about that? It's not quite like that. Oh, yes. It is not violence. But it is a challenging difference in the structure of those communities. And they have a total different outlook, and they're as different as any two communities in the state. And I love them both dearly. And then to complicate things, we have a bunch of little municipalities. I'm sorry, I'm about to lose my voice, I think. But, we've got the major of the little ones are DuBois and Hudson and Pavilion. And then we got some other wide spots in the road so it's just really difficult. And it leads to kind of this log rolling that I think where you have to pile everything on, and it causes, I think, government to actually deviate from what government's supposed to do, in my mind. But I do support this, and I'll keep searching for more ways. Maybe there's a way to satisfy people outside the municipality somehow and further work. But if this bill goes along, we did get an email from the clerk of Teton County, and I want to point that out to you. She just suggests we tweak the dates with any ballot proposition. I'm guessing this is probably I don't know how to do this, but I don't really want to waste time on that set of amendments if the bill's not going to go. It just seems like that would be not fruitful. So I'll stand on that.
Okay. Further discussion on the bill.
Well,
Mr. Co-Chairman, you got an amendment?
You ready for them?
We're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. have gotten a lot out of the discussion from the public today on this. And I really think it'd be a mistake by this committee to withhold consideration of this bill by the entire legislature. I think it's too important. We've got 99 municipalities. Admittedly, not all of them are going to be it's applicable to, but it's relevant to the entire state. And I think that the amendment that I'm going to present will make it more palatable and make it harder for counties to legitimately protest this bill. And this is the way it reads. On the top of page 3, you would write a municipal tax authorized by this paragraph. If paragraph isn't the right thing, put in whatever it is, shall be proposed only in the event that a countywide tax request has been declined. A similar countywide tax request has been declined. And I'll just leave it at that. And renumber the paragraphs appropriately.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, what you're saying is that you could have 2 elections then. If the first one failed, turn around and then have a second proposal brought forth by the council of, let's say, we've used Cheyenne as an example, the firehouse. They can come back now with this amendment and go to Plan B.
Well, what I have in mind with this amendment is that the countywide request, or the countywide request is a request to put it on the ballot, not a result of the election. Because before you can have an election, you got to have an agreement that there can't be an election. And that's what this little paragraph would assure, that yes, the county says you guys are cutting us out. This paragraph will assure that the counties or the cities are not trumping the ability for the counties to participate. And I think that's fair.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Senator Kinski.
Is that a motion?
That's an amendment, yeah.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Motion's been made by Co-Chairman Madden and seconded by Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman.
Discussion on the amendment. Representative Conley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a question. Just to make sure, I assume it would go to the county commissioners, and what you are asking for in this is that the county commissioners take a vote, and if they decline, so no. So I'm not understanding how this would work.
There's a process that goes through. If a city like Buffalo wants to have the county sponsor a vote, the county is obligated, or there's some process where they have to bring the cities or the municipalities in to say, do you guys agree to this or not? Now, if you're in your county and in my county, if you have one municipality says, no, I don't agree to it, then they've held, they've
held hostage.
To me, it's a travesty that you could have that happen.
Mhm.
And this would assure that, to say, well, if you don't want to, we'll go ahead and do it on our own by going through item number C and number D in this bill.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to be too cynical, but this question is there an obligation by your amendment that those others decline? Or if they do nothing, can the municipality go forward?
The other proposition. Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair. The county commission.
They if they don't do anything, that's the same as declining. I mean, if they just say, no, we're not interested in talking about that, you've made the request, it's been denied or declined, and that's all it says.
Does everybody understand the amendment? The process going through the county to get it on the proposal on the ballot, and if the county refuses or doesn't act, or in your words, holds hostage to the project, then the city of Cheyenne or the municipality would have the evidence to come forward and say, we tried this route, it didn't work, and so we're going to go our own way.
Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion. Senator Kinski.
I like the Madden Amendment. It's an intriguing idea. If it were to be improved at all, I think it might be that you'd have some period of time, like 4 years, during which there was just the optional just was not in place at all, to try and assuage the concerns of the counties that there'd be some sort of Machiavellian plot by the towns to go without for some undue period of time. Because, most of these communities cannot go without that tax for, well, through a bad week, let alone for 3 or 4 years. But I like advancing it in the form that it's got. The idea that the whole body should consider it, I think, has some merit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kinski. Further comments on the amendment? Question on the amendment? Question being, we have Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me fully understand here. So is this saying the proposition has to go to a vote of the citizens and be turned down before the city? It only has to go before the county commissioners
to call an election.
Call an election. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can help, for those that haven't lived with this process, as either a county commissioner or city or a town, 2/3 of those living within the municipal areas have to agree with the county that they're going to put it on the ballot. And if you can't get 1 or 2 towns to go along, or you can't get the commission to go along, it never even gets onto the ballot. So the Madden Amendment just says if you're in a deadlock situation like that, then the city can go ahead and vote on just having its own citywide sales tax.
Right.
So in those counties where people are able to get along, it won't change anything. So the cautionary note that the county sounded is, well, what if the cities conspire to just make sure that there's no agreement, and then they can get a citywide tax? I think the limit on that is that most of these cities are just, well, they're like all government. They just spend up to every dime that they've got, and they really can't go without this tax for any period of time. Once that tax is in place, it's pretty much going to be renewed and renewed and renewed and renewed. So the idea that a town would intentionally blow up the tax just so they can have a town tax, I just can't see it happening if the tax is already in place, because they're also abjectly dependent on getting that thing renewed.
Further questions on the amendment then? Are we ready to take the vote? Okay. All those in favor of Representative Madden's amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That amendment passes. Back on the bill. Further discussion on the bill.
I'm going to miss being able to say the Madden Amendment.
Madden. Had to be reminded of the Madden Matrix today. That was good memories.
Madden formula.
Okay. No further discussion on the bill? Ready for, okay. Roll call on the bill.
Mr. Chairman. Again, the department had recommended changing the effective date on this.
Never did get back to that last page. I had it written down again. Motion's been made by Senator Case to amend to January 2020, from July 1st, 2019 to January 2020. Second.
Call the question.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, no. Passes. Back on the bill, roll call on the bill. Thank you, Josh, for that catch again.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So this is for 19 LSO 91 as amended. Senator Case.
Aye.
Senator Ellis. No. Senator Kinski.
No.
Senator Wasserberger. Representative Connolly. Aye. Representative Dayton. Representative Furphy. Aye. Representative Hallinan.
No.
Representative Kinner. Representative Larson excused. Representative Obermuller. Representative Paxton.
No.
Co-Chairman Madden.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Peterson.
Aye.
That failed, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Bill fails. We forgot to assign Mr. Co-Chair that last lodging tax, and that would have to be a House bill.
Yeah, it would.
So just to make a note of that, Josh, that would be a House bill starting on the House, that lodging tax bill.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, that's the two bills that we had on the agenda for this morning. We'll go ahead and adjourn, not adjourn, but recess. Thank you, Sarah Kinski, until 1 o'clock. We'll come back and pick up the other 4 bills that we're going to be talking about today and get through those. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you at 1 o'clock.